Eleanor Wilson's trembling fingers froze on the magnifying mirror, her morning application of face cream forgotten. The small bump on her neck, the one she'd dismissed for weeks as just another aging nuisance, had changed overnight. What she'd expected to be a simple pimple now pulsed with an angry red halo, its dark center seemingly moving of its own accord. Martha from next door dropped her teacup with a crash when Eleanor reluctantly showed her the growth, backing away with a hand pressed to her mouth. "Sweet Jesus, Ellie," she whispered. "That's exactly what Stanley had before they took him." The bathroom light flickered as Eleanor leaned closer, remembering Howard's warnings about the chemical plant, warnings she'd filed away with his death certificate 5 years ago. "We're calling your son, right now," Martha commanded, though her voice quavered. What was growing beneath her skin, and why did it feel like Howard was trying to tell her something from beyond the grave? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Eleanor Wilson had never considered herself old, despite what her Medicare card and Social Security check suggested. At 65, her silver-streaked auburn hair remained more stubborn than her arthritis, and her mind sharper than most folks half her age. 5 years a widow, she'd carved out a life of dignified independence at Whispering Pines, a retirement community that advertised golden years in comfort on billboards throughout Phoenix. The comfort part was debatable. Her 2-bedroom unit had decent morning light for her houseplants and just enough space for the books she couldn't bear to part with after 4 decades as a librarian. The kitchen, though cramped, sufficed for her modest cooking ambitions, completing Howard's and her dream cookbook of family recipes, the one project she'd promised herself to finish before joining him. Eleanor lived on a fixed income that stretched like old elastic, just enough give to cover necessities but threatening to snap with any unexpected expense. Medical bills were the enemy, prescription costs the recurring villain. Each doctor's visit meant weighing pride against pain, independence against intervention. Her son, James, Dr. James Wilson, to his dermatology patients, called every Sunday at 7 p.m. sharp. Their conversations followed a familiar script: his busy practice, his recent medical conference, polite inquiries about her health that she deflected with practiced ease. "I'm right as rain," she'd say, even when she wasn't. "Don't you worry about your old mother." She'd rather eat glass than become his burden. What James never mentioned was how his eyes lingered on her neck during their monthly dinners, professional concern battling with filial guilt. Eleanor pretended not to notice. Whispering Pines nestled against the eastern edge of town, its manicured grounds sloping gently toward Stillwater Creek, which curled around the property like a question mark. Beyond the creek stood the Reynolds Chemical Corporation facility, its smokestacks visible from Eleanor's kitchen window. Howard had called them poison pencils writing death notices in the sky before his heart attack 5 years ago. Frank Reynolds himself lived in the penthouse apartment of the Whispering Pines main building, a widower like Eleanor, but with considerably deeper pockets. They had history, the complicated kind that small towns generate and memories preserve despite decades of distance. Frank had asked Eleanor to the senior prom in 1975. She'd gone with Howard instead. Martha Jenkins from Unit 17B was Eleanor's closest friend, a former elementary school teacher with a fondness for conspiracy theories that had only intensified since her husband's passing. Lately, Martha had been collecting newspaper clippings about unusual illnesses in the area, whispering about patterns when they shared coffee on Eleanor's small patio. "Just because I'm paranoid," Martha often said, tapping her temple with a gnarled finger, "doesn't mean they aren't up to something." Eleanor had always smiled indulgently at her friend's theories, until the small bump appeared on her neck. The bump first appeared on a Tuesday in early October, unremarkable as a period at the end of a sentence. Eleanor noticed it while applying her nightly moisturizer, fingers skimming the thin skin where her neck met her jawline. A small, firm node. Nothing worth mentioning. Certainly nothing worth the $50 copay to have James or one of his colleagues tell her it was just another sign of aging. "Vanity, thy name is Eleanor," she muttered to her reflection, dabbing a bit of over-the-counter hydrocortisone on the spot before turning out the bathroom light. By Thursday, the bump had grown pea-sized, tender to the touch. Eleanor rummaged through her medicine cabinet, past prescription bottles with dates stretching back to Howard's final illness. She found an ancient tube of antibiotic cream, expiration date faded but still legible, 2018. Close enough for government work, she decided, applying a small dot before covering it with a bandage. Sunday evening brought James's weekly call, the phone ringing precisely at 7 as she cleared away the dishes from her solitary dinner. "How's my favorite mother?" His voice carried the hurried warmth of someone with another appointment in 20 minutes. "Still your only mother, last time I checked," Eleanor replied with practiced lightness. "How are Diane and the kids?" They moved through their usual choreography. James's practice was busy. His daughter had made honor roll. His son was showing promise in baseball. Eleanor listened, offering appropriate responses while absently touching the bandage on her neck, now covering a bump the size of a marble. "And how about you, Mom? Everything okay at Whispering Pines?" Eleanor hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the bandage. "Tell him," a voice whispered in her mind. "He's a dermatologist, for heaven's sake." "Right as rain," she said instead. "Martha and I are starting a book club." First selection is that mystery everyone's talking about, the one with the librarian detective. "Sounds perfect for you," James said, relieved she wasn't bringing up the leaky faucet he'd promised to fix 3 visits ago. "Listen, Mom, I've got to run. The Andersons invited us for dinner. Same time next Sunday?" "I'll be here," Eleanor replied, the words more weighted than she intended. "Give my love to everyone." After hanging up, she peeled back the bandage in the bathroom mirror. The area around the bump had reddened, a small sunburst of inflammation. "Just a blocked pore," she told her reflection. "Or maybe a spider bite." Monday morning, Eleanor joined Martha for their usual coffee on the community patio. The air carried the crisp edge of autumn, desert temperatures finally relenting after the punishing summer. "You're looking peaky," Martha observed over the rim of her mug. "And what's with the turtleneck?" "It's still 75 degrees. Eleanor adjusted the collar that concealed her neck. "Just a little cold is all." Martha's eyes narrowed behind rhinestone-studded glasses. "Uh-huh. And I'm just a little suspicious of that chemical factory pumping God knows what into our air." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Did you see that Stanley Mercer from Building C was taken to the hospital Friday night? 3rd resident this month." "Flu season," Eleanor suggested. "In October? In Arizona?" Martha scoffed. "Stanley had some kind of growth on his arm. Betsy told me it started as a little bump and got infected. Doctors are running tests, whatever that means." Eleanor's hand drifted to her neck before she could stop herself. Martha caught the movement, eyes widening. "Eleanor Wilson, what are you hiding under that turtleneck?" "It's nothing, just a—" Eleanor paused, searching for the right word. "Blemish." "Show me." Reluctantly, Eleanor tugged down her collar. Martha's sharp intake of breath was not reassuring. "Sugar, that's not nothing. That's angry as a hornet's nest. It's fine. Just need to keep it clean." Martha pressed her lips into a thin line. "My sister-in-law had something similar last year. Turned out to be MRSA. Nearly lost her arm." "Always the optimist," Eleanor said dryly, readjusting her collar. When she returned to her apartment, a certified letter waited in her mailbox. The return address showed Reynolds Chemical Corporation in authoritative embossed lettering. Eleanor stared at it, Howard's voice echoing in her memory. "That place is poison, Ellie. The creek, the groundwater. They're dumping something, I know it. She slid a butter knife under the seal, unfolding crisp letterhead. Dear Resident, it began formally. As part of our commitment to community relations, Reynolds Chemical Corporation is pleased to announce comprehensive water testing in the Whispering Pines area. While we maintain the highest safety standards, recent upgrades to our facility require additional monitoring. Eleanor stopped reading, her attention caught by the fine print at the bottom. Residents are advised that slight discoloration or mineral content in water remains within acceptable EPA guidelines. She tossed the letter into her recycling bin, wincing as the movement pulled at her neck. The tenderness had deepened overnight, radiating heat. In the bathroom, she removed the bandage to find the bump had developed a dark center, the surrounding skin tight and glossy. Time for the big guns, she muttered, opening the medicine cabinet. She swallowed 2 expired antibiotics left over from a dental procedure years ago, then reapplied a thicker layer of antibiotic cream. That night, Eleanor dreamed of Howard. Not the thin, gray Howard of his final months, but the vibrant man who'd swept her off her feet at 20. In the dream, he stood by Stillwater Creek, pointing urgently at the water. "It's all connected, Ellie," he kept saying. "Follow the water." She woke at 3 a.m., sheets damp with sweat, the dream lingering like perfume. Her neck throbbed in time with her heartbeat, pain sharp enough to bring tears to her eyes. In the bathroom, she fumbled for the light switch, blinking against the sudden brightness. The bump had doubled in size, now resembling a small boil. The center had darkened further, almost black against the angry red surround. Eleanor touched it gingerly, gasping as even slight pressure sent daggers of pain shooting down her neck. "Maybe it's time," she whispered to her reflection, considering a trip to urgent care. But the thought of medical bills, of James's disappointment that she hadn't called him first, of potentially being told she needed to consider her living situation, it all pushed back against the pain. "Tomorrow," she promised herself. If it's not better by tomorrow. But Wednesday brought her niece Rebecca's surprise visit, derailing any medical plans. Rebecca arrived with a designer handbag and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, claiming to be just passing through on her way to a nursing conference. "Aunt Ellie, you're looking—" Rebecca paused, head tilting as she assessed Eleanor from the doorway. "Tired. Are you sleeping okay?" Eleanor self-consciously adjusted her scarf. "Just fine, dear. Come in. I'll put on some coffee." Rebecca moved through the apartment with the professional efficiency of her nursing training, eyes cataloging details. She paused at the collection of prescription bottles on the kitchen counter. "Taking your medications regularly?" she asked, picking up a pill bottle. "This one's expired, Aunt Ellie." "I manage just fine," Eleanor said, gently removing the bottle from Rebecca's hand. "How's your mother?" Rebecca launched into a detailed account of her mother's knee replacement, her own promotion at Phoenix General, and her recent breakup with that investment banker who wasn't worth my time. Throughout the conversation, her gaze kept returning to Eleanor's scarf. "Are you warm? It's pretty stuffy in here," Rebecca finally said, reaching for the thermostat. "I'm fine," Eleanor replied too quickly. "Poor circulation at my age." Rebecca's nurse's eyes narrowed. "Let me check your pulse," she said, reaching for Eleanor's wrist with practiced efficiency. A little elevated. And you're warm to the touch." Before Eleanor could protest, Rebecca's cool fingers were at her neck, sliding beneath the scarf. Her professional demeanor faltered at what she found. "Aunt Ellie, what in heaven's name is this?" She pushed the scarf aside completely. "This needs medical attention, now." "It's just a spider bite or something," Eleanor protested weakly. "I've been treating it." "With what? Magic and wishful thinking?" Rebecca's voice took on the authoritative tone she likely used with non-compliant patients. This is infected. Badly. Eleanor sighed, shoulders sagging. The urgent care copay is $75. Medicare supplement doesn't kick in until— I don't care if it's $750, Rebecca interrupted. This is serious. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling Uncle James. Don't you dare, Eleanor said with unexpected steel. He has patience and responsibilities. I won't be a burden. Rebecca stared at her aunt, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she put her phone away. Fine, but I'm taking you to urgent care myself. Right now. As they gathered Eleanor's insurance card and purse, the older woman couldn't help noticing how Rebecca's eyes lingered on the framed photos of Howard, on the antique desk that had been Eleanor's grandmother's, on the small curio cabinet holding Eleanor's modest collection of vintage first editions. Are those books still valuable? Rebecca asked casually as they headed for the door. Mom mentioned you were thinking of selling them. Eleanor frowned. I never said any such thing. They're for James's children when they're older. A flicker of something, disappointment, annoyance, crossed Rebecca's face before her nurse's smile returned. Of course. I must have misunderstood. As they walked to Rebecca's car, they passed Martha returning from her morning walk. The older woman's eyes widened at the sight of Eleanor being escorted out. Everything okay, Ellie? She called. Just fine, Eleanor replied automatically. Rebecca's taking me for a little checkup. Martha's gaze darted between them, suspicion evident. Call me when you get back, she said firmly. I found something you should see, about Stanley. In the car, Rebecca adjusted her mirror. Your neighbor seems intense. Martha's just concerned. We look out for each other here. That's sweet, Rebecca said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. But you need real medical care, not neighborhood gossip. As they pulled away from Whispering Pines, Eleanor caught sight of Frank Reynolds standing on his penthouse balcony, watching their departure with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. His gaze followed their car until they turned onto the main road, headed for Phoenix Urgent Care and a diagnosis Eleanor wasn't prepared to hear. The Phoenix Urgent Care waiting room buzzed with quiet misery. A toddler with an earache, an elderly man clutching his side, a teenager with what looked like a baseball-induced black eye. Eleanor sat rigidly in a molded plastic chair, Rebecca flipping efficiently through insurance paperwork beside her. Medicare and what's your supplement again? Rebecca asked, pen poised. Blue Cross Silver, Eleanor replied, wincing as a wave of heat radiated from her neck. But the deductible is not the concern right now, Rebecca finished firmly. Your health is what matters. The words sounded right, caring even, but something in Rebecca's tone struck a discordant note. Eleanor had been a librarian long enough to recognize when someone was skimming rather than truly reading. Rebecca's concern felt performative, her attention elsewhere. After an hour's wait that felt interminable, a nurse called Eleanor's name. Rebecca rose to follow, but Eleanor placed a hand on her arm. I can manage, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Why don't you get yourself some coffee? This might take a while. Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. I'll check on you in a bit. The examination room was chilly, the paper cover on the table crinkling as Eleanor perched on its edge. The nurse, Patty according to her name tag, took Eleanor's vitals with brisk efficiency, her expression shifting when she saw the inflamed area on Eleanor's neck. How long has this been here? She asked, gloved fingers gently probing the periphery. About a week, Eleanor admitted. Started as just a small bump. Patty's eyes narrowed. Temperature's 101.2. I'm going to have Dr. Williams come in right away. Dr. Williams proved to be a harried-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She examined the growth with growing concern. "This is a significant infection, Mrs. Wilson," she said, stepping back. "The inflammation pattern is unusual. I'd like to take a culture and start you on IV antibiotics immediately." Eleanor felt lightheaded. "IV? Is that really necessary?" "I'm concerned about the proximity to major blood vessels and the rapid progression," Dr. Williams replied, already writing orders on her tablet. "This isn't a typical abscess." What followed was a blur of activity. A needle stick for the IV, blood drawn for tests, a painful procedure to extract fluid from the center of the growth for culture. Through it all, Eleanor found herself strangely detached, as if observing from a distance. "Where's your daughter?" Dr. Williams asked as a nurse hung an antibiotic bag. "Niece," Eleanor corrected. "She's probably still in the waiting room. I'll have someone update her. Mrs. Wilson, I'm going to be honest with you. I'd like to admit you to Phoenix General. This infection is showing signs of being systemic, and I'm concerned about possible septicemia." The word landed like a stone. "Hospital." "No, I can't." "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Williams interrupted gently, "this isn't optional. Whatever this infection is, it's aggressive. The hospital has better resources to identify and treat it." Eleanor's hand trembled as she touched her wedding ring, twisting it anxiously. "My insurance will cover emergency admission," Dr. Williams said, though a flicker in her eyes suggested it might not be that simple. "Your health is the priority now." When Rebecca finally joined her, Eleanor was already connected to monitors, the IV dripping steadily into her arm. Her niece's eyes widened at the medical paraphernalia. "They want to admit me to the hospital," Eleanor said before Rebecca could speak. Something complicated crossed Rebecca's face. Concern, calculation, decision. "Then that's what we'll do," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'll call Uncle James." "No," Eleanor said sharply. "Not yet. Not until we know what this is." Rebecca frowned. "He'd want to know." "He's presenting at that dermatology conference in San Diego," Eleanor reminded her. "The one he's been preparing for months. I won't ruin that for him over what's probably just a bad infection." "Aunt Ellie, this is serious." 24 hours, Eleanor insisted. "Give me that long before you call him." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but I'm staying with you." The transfer to Phoenix General happened with bewildering speed. One moment Eleanor was in the urgent care cubicle. The next she was being wheeled through fluorescent-lit corridors to an ambulance, Rebecca following with Eleanor's purse clutched to her chest. As the ambulance doors closed, Eleanor caught a glimpse of a familiar luxury sedan pulling into the urgent care parking lot. Frank Reynolds's Cadillac, unmistakable with its custom paint job. What was he doing there? The question dissolved as pain medication seeped through her IV, drawing a veil over her thoughts. Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness during the hospital admission process. Faces appeared and disappeared. Doctors, nurses, a social worker asking about advanced directives. Through it all, Rebecca remained a constant presence, answering questions Eleanor couldn't, providing insurance information, signing forms. "Your niece is very efficient," observed the night nurse as she adjusted Eleanor's IV. "Medical background?" "She's a nurse at Phoenix General," Eleanor murmured drowsily. "Different department, though." "Well, she certainly knows her way around the system. Got you a private room and everything, which isn't easy these days." Eleanor frowned, trying to push through the fog of medication. How had Rebecca managed that? Before she could pursue the thought, a new figure appeared in the doorway, Dr. Catherine Montgomery, according to the ID badge clipped to her white coat. "Mrs. Wilson." "I'm the infectious disease specialist assigned to your case," she said, approaching the bed. "May I examine your neck?" Dr. Montgomery's examination was gentle but thorough, her expression growing more concerned as she studied the inflamed area. The urgent care physician was right to admit you, she said finally. This isn't a typical infection. What is it then? Eleanor asked, fully alert now despite the medication. We'll need the culture results to be certain, but the presentation is consistent with a parasitic infection, possibly myiasis or dirophilariasis. Parasitic? Eleanor repeated, the word tasting bitter. You mean like… A parasite, yes, possibly transmitted by an insect vector. Dr. Montgomery turned to her tablet, making notes. Do you garden? Spend time outdoors? Any travel in the last 6 months? I have a small patio garden at Whispering Pines. That's my retirement community. No travel, though. Not since Howard, my husband, passed. Doctor. Montgomery looked up sharply. Whispering Pines, near Stillwater Creek? Yes, that's right. The doctor's expression shifted subtly. You're the third patient I've seen this month from that area with unusual infections, all presenting with similar localized inflammation. Eleanor's heart quickened. The third? Was one of them Stanley Mercer? I can't discuss other patients, but… Dr. Montgomery hesitated. Let's just say we're seeing a pattern that concerns us. Rebecca, who had been scrolling through her phone in the corner, suddenly rejoined the conversation. Are you suggesting some kind of outbreak, doctor? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Dr. Montgomery replied carefully. But the county health department has been notified. After the doctor left, Rebecca stepped into the hallway to make a call, her voice too low for Eleanor to catch. The medication was pulling her toward sleep again, but she fought against it, trying to connect fragmented thoughts. Martha's warnings, Howard's dream self pointing at the creek, the Reynolds chemical letter about water testing, 3 patients from Whispering Pines. It's all connected, Eleanor murmured, Howard's dream words becoming her own. Rebecca returned, her professional smile firmly in place. Good news, Aunt Ellie. I've arranged to take emergency family leave to stay with you. Eleanor struggled to focus on her niece's face. What about your patients? They'll manage without me, Rebecca said, settling into the visitor's chair with her designer handbag. Family comes first. As Eleanor drifted toward uneasy sleep, she caught Rebecca eyeing the small gold locket around her neck. Howard's last gift, containing a photo of them on their wedding day and a lock of his hair. Something in her niece's calculating gaze sent a chill through Eleanor that had nothing to do with her fever. Morning brought more tests, blood draws, imaging, specialists appearing at intervals to examine the increasingly painful growth. Eleanor's fever hovered stubbornly at 101 despite the IV antibiotics. We need to consider surgical intervention, Dr. Montgomery told her during morning rounds. The infection isn't responding to antibiotics, which supports our parasitic theory. Surgery? Eleanor echoed faintly. A simple procedure to excise the affected tissue and identify exactly what we're dealing with. Rebecca immediately took charge. What are the risks? The recovery time, insurance coverage? Dr. Montgomery addressed Eleanor directly, pointedly ignoring Rebecca's rapid-fire questions. The location is challenging, close to major vessels and nerves, but leaving it untreated is far more dangerous. When? Eleanor asked simply. This afternoon, if possible. I've already booked the surgical suite. After Dr. Montgomery left, Rebecca disappeared again for another phone call. Eleanor used the opportunity to reach for her own phone, fingers trembling as she dialed Martha's number. Eleanor Wilson, where on God's green earth have you been? Martha demanded without preamble. I've been calling since yesterday. I'm in the hospital, Eleanor whispered, glancing at the door to ensure Rebecca hadn't returned. Phoenix General, that bump on my neck, they think it's some kind of parasite. Martha's sharp intake of breath carried clearly over the line. Just like Stanley and Beatrice Parker from Building D. Ellie, I found something, newspaper clippings from the county archives. There was a similar outbreak in 1992, right after Reynolds Chemical changed their waste disposal procedures. Howard suspected something, Eleanor said. He was collecting water samples before he died. Where did he keep his research? In his study. There's a locked file cabinet I never opened after. You need to call James, Martha insisted. Tell him to look through Howard's papers before... The door swung open as Rebecca returned. Eleanor quickly ended the call. Who was that? Rebecca asked, eyes narrowing. Just checking my voicemail, Eleanor lied, setting the phone aside. Any news from the doctor? Rebecca seemed about to press the issue, then visibly shifted tactics. They're preparing for your surgery. I've signed all the consent forms. She hesitated, then added with practiced concern, Aunt Ellie, I've been thinking about your recovery. You'll need someone to look after you. I'd like to stay at your place for a while, help you get back on your feet. The thought of Rebecca going through her things, through Howard's things, sent a spike of alarm through Eleanor. That's very kind, but Martha can check in on me. She's right next door. Martha? Rebecca's laugh held a dismissive edge. Aunt Ellie, she must be nearly 80. She can hardly take care of herself, let alone a post-surgical patient. Before Eleanor could respond, a nurse entered with pre-surgical medications. As they flowed into her IV, Eleanor felt her eyelids growing heavy. The last thing she saw before drifting off was Rebecca reaching for her phone, scrolling to a contact labeled FR. Eleanor's dreams were vivid, saturated with meaning. Howard stood by Stillwater Creek again, but this time he wasn't alone. Stanley Mercer was there, and Beatrice Parker, and others Eleanor recognized from Whispering Pines. All had dark, angry wounds visible on their skin. All pointed accusingly at the Reynolds Chemical facility looming behind them. It's in the water, Ellie, Howard kept saying. It's always been in the water. She jerked awake to find herself being wheeled into the surgical suite, bright lights overhead, masked figures moving with choreographed precision. Dr. Montgomery appeared at her side. Mrs. Wilson, we're going to take good care of you, she said, her eyes conveying a warmth her mask concealed. When you wake up, this will all be over. As the anesthesia took hold, Eleanor fought to remember something important. Something about Howard's research, about Rebecca's phone call, about Frank Reynolds and his sudden appearance at the urgent care, but the darkness pulled her under before she could grasp the connection. She awakened slowly, surfacing through layers of grogginess and discomfort. Her neck throbbed dully, bandaged and immobilized. The private room was dimly lit, machines beeping quietly beside her. "Welcome back," said a male voice, familiar, worried, beloved. Eleanor blinked, focusing on the figure beside her bed. "James?" Her son leaned forward, taking her hand in his. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his normally immaculate appearance rumpled, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. "Why didn't you call me, Mom?" "Your conference is not more important than you," he said firmly. "Rebecca finally called me last night. I caught the first flight back." Eleanor tried to organize her thoughts through the post-anesthetic fog. "The surgery was successful," James assured her. "They removed the growth. Dr. Montgomery is running tests on it now." Something in his hesitation sent a warning signal through Eleanor's mind. "What aren't you telling me?" James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that Eleanor's heart constricted. "It wasn't a typical abscess, Mom. It was..." He struggled for words. There was something inside it. Something alive. Alive? The word hung in the sterile hospital air, Eleanor's voice barely a whisper. The post-surgical painkillers dulled the edges of her fear, but couldn't eliminate it entirely. "What do you mean, alive?" James shifted uncomfortably in the visitor's chair, the strain of the past 24 hours evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. As a dermatologist, he'd seen his share of unusual skin conditions, but his professional composure had clearly been shaken. "A parasite," he finally said, choosing his words carefully. Dr. Montgomery removed what appears to be a Dirofilaria immitis larva, a type of parasitic roundworm normally found in dogs and transmitted by mosquitoes. In humans, it typically creates a small nodule and dies. This one didn't. Eleanor closed her eyes, fighting a wave of revulsion. Something had been living inside her, feeding on her, growing beneath her skin while she dismissed it as a simple pimple. The thought made her stomach turn. "They're running more tests," James continued, his clinical tone failing to mask his concern. "It's extremely rare in humans, especially in urban settings, and the size—" He stopped abruptly, reconsidering his words. "Well, let's just say Dr. Montgomery is consulting with the CDC. The Centers for Disease Control?" Eleanor's eyes snapped open. "James, what aren't you telling me?" Her son sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Howard's that for a moment Eleanor saw her late husband sitting beside her instead. "This isn't the first case they've seen recently. All from your area. All presenting with unusually large, viable parasites. It's not normal, Mom." A cold certainty settled in Eleanor's chest. Martha was right. "Martha? Your neighbor with all the conspiracy theories?" James looked skeptical. "Mom, this isn't some sinister plot."
Unusual, yes, but there's probably a simple environmental explanation. Like chemical dumping in Stillwater Creek? Eleanor pressed. The creek that runs behind Whispering Pines, right past the Reynolds plant? James's expression shifted subtly. "What do you know about that?" "Your father suspected it years ago. He was collecting samples, documenting changes in the water before he died." Eleanor tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandaged neck. "His research materials are still in the apartment, in his study, the locked file cabinet." "Mom, Dad's been gone 5 years," James said gently. "Whatever he was investigating is still happening," Eleanor finished firmly. "Stanley Mercer, Beatrice Parker, now me. All with the same type of infection, all living along the creek. It's not a coincidence." James looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Eleanor's expression stopped him. Instead, he asked, "Where's the key to the cabinet?" "In my jewelry box, under the false bottom. The small brass key." Eleanor reached for his hand. "James, promise me you'll look. Your father wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was an environmental engineer. If he suspected something, there was a reason." Before James could respond, the door opened and Rebecca entered, carrying a takeout coffee and wearing an expression of surprised displeasure at finding James present. "Uncle James, I didn't expect you until tomorrow." Her voice was warm, but her eyes were cool as they moved between mother and son. "I caught an earlier flight," James replied, his tone neutral. "The conference could manage without me." Rebecca approached the bed, professional concern replacing her initial reaction. "How are you feeling, Aunt Ellie? Any pain? Disorientation?" "I'm fine," Eleanor said, suddenly wary. Something about Rebecca's overly solicitous manner rang false, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. "Just tired." "That's to be expected after surgery," Rebecca said smoothly. "The doctor wants you to rest. In fact, visiting hours are technically over, but they made an exception." She glanced pointedly at James. "I'm staying," James said, a hint of steel beneath his mild tone. "Mom and I were just discussing Dad's research." Something flickered across Rebecca's face. Alarm? Concern? Before her nurse's smile returned. "Howard's environmental work. That was ages ago, wasn't it? I doubt it's relevant to Aunt Ellie's condition." "You'd be surprised what's still relevant," Eleanor said quietly, "especially when it comes to water quality around Reynolds Chemical." Rebecca's smile tightened fractionally.
We should focus on your recovery now, Aunt Ellie. The doctors say you'll need significant help when you're discharged. Someone to monitor the wound, administer medications. I've already arranged family leave to stay with you at Whispering Pines. That won't be necessary, James interjected. Mom will be coming to stay with Diane and me during her recovery. The two stared at each other, an unspoken tension filling the room. Eleanor watched the exchange with growing unease, sensing currents beneath the surface she couldn't quite identify. "Well," Rebecca finally said, her voice brittle, "that's a discussion for later. Right now, Aunt Ellie needs rest." She turned to Eleanor with manufactured concern. "I noticed your house keys in your purse. I thought I'd pop over to Whispering Pines and get you some comfortable clothes and toiletries for your hospital stay." Alarm bells rang in Eleanor's mind. "That's very thoughtful, but James can handle it." "I insist," Rebecca said, already reaching for Eleanor's purse on the bedside table. "Uncle James just got off a long flight. Besides, I know where everything is." Before either could protest further, Rebecca had extracted the keys and was heading for the door. "I'll be back first thing tomorrow with your things. Sleep well, Aunt Ellie." As the door closed behind her, Eleanor turned to James, no longer bothering to hide her concern. "She's after something. I don't know what, but it's not about helping me." James frowned. "Rebecca, she's always been a bit intense, but she's family. She's been asking about my first editions, about Howard's things, and she keeps making calls from the hallway, whispering so I can't hear." Eleanor clutched her son's hand. "James, I need you to go to the apartment tonight. Before she does. Check your father's files and watch Rebecca." James looked torn between skepticism and concern. "Mom, you've been through a lot." "The anesthesia can cause paranoia." "James Wilson," Eleanor said sharply, summoning the maternal authority that had once sent him scurrying to clean his room, "I am perfectly lucid, and I am telling you that something is wrong. Rebecca is not here out of family duty. She wants something, and I think it has to do with your father's research." Perhaps it was the uncharacteristic steel in her voice, or the clarity in her eyes despite the medication, but James finally nodded. "All right, I'll go tonight." He hesitated, then added, "But Mom, try to rest. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together." After James left, promising to return first thing in the morning, Eleanor found herself alone with the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the dull throb of her surgical wound. The weight of what Dr. Montgomery had removed, a living parasite feeding beneath her skin, felt like a violation beyond the physical. Something inside her that shouldn't have been there, growing without her knowledge or consent. She drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, dreams populated by dark shapes writhing beneath the surface of Stillwater Creek. In one particularly vivid sequence, she stood on her patio at Whispering Pines, watching as Frank Reynolds emptied drums of dark liquid into the water, his face twisted in a grotesque smile. When he turned toward her, his skin rippled with movement, as if something lived beneath it. Eleanor jerked awake to find Dr. Montgomery checking her vital signs, the room now bathed in the gray light of early morning. "Bad dreams?" the doctor asked kindly. "You could say that," Eleanor replied, her mouth dry. "What time is it?" "Just after 5, Dr. Montgomery said, making notes on her tablet. "Your son called to say he's on his way. How's the pain this morning?" "Manageable," Eleanor said, though in truth her neck felt as if it were on fire. "Doctor, I need to know, what exactly did you find? James mentioned a parasite, but he was being careful with the details." Dr. Montgomery set down her tablet, pulling up a chair. Her expression was serious but compassionate. "Mrs. Wilson, we removed a Dirophilaria immitis larva from your neck, what's commonly known as heartworm. It's a parasite normally found in dogs transmitted by mosquitoes." Human infections are rare, and when they do occur, the larvae typically die before reaching maturity. But mine didn't, Eleanor guessed. No, Dr. Montgomery confirmed. The specimen we removed was unusually large and quite alive. More concerning is that it's the third such case I've seen in 2 months, all from patients living near Stillwater Creek. Eleanor nodded, pieces falling into place. It's in the water, isn't it? Dr. Montgomery looked surprised. That's our current theory, yes. Mosquitoes breeding in contaminated water, possibly carrying a more aggressive strain of the parasite, the county health department is investigating. And Reynolds Chemical? Are they investigating them too? The doctor's expression turned guarded. I can't comment on the specifics of the investigation, Mrs. Wilson, but I can tell you that environmental factors are being considered. Eleanor decided to take a risk. My husband was Howard Wilson, an environmental engineer. Before he died, he was investigating chemical dumping in Stillwater Creek, specifically by Reynolds Chemical. His research is still in our apartment. Dr. Montgomery's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing genuine interest. Howard Wilson. I studied his paper on industrial contamination patterns during my public health rotation. His work on bioaccumulation in freshwater ecosystems was groundbreaking. Hope flared in Eleanor's chest. Then you understand why this matters. It's not just about my infection, it's about what's happening to everyone at Whispering Pines. Dr. Montgomery glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. Mrs. Wilson, I shouldn't tell you this, but 2 patients with similar infections have died in the past month. Officially, the cause was listed as septicemia, but the parasitic load in their systems was unlike anything I've seen in my career. If your husband had evidence of chemical contamination— The door swung open, cutting off her words. Rebecca stood in the doorway, a small overnight bag in hand and a tight smile on her face. Good morning. I brought your things, Aunt Ellie. Dr. Montgomery straightened, professional demeanor firmly back in place. Ms. Wilson, your aunt had a comfortable night. I was just explaining the post-operative care requirements. Rebecca set the bag down, her nurse's eye taking in the scene. Any complications? None so far, Dr. Montgomery replied. But we'll be monitoring closely for the next 48 hours. As the doctor excused herself, Rebecca began unpacking the overnight bag with efficiency. I brought your favorite nightgown, some toiletries, your reading glasses. She pulled out items one by one, arranging them on the bedside table. Eleanor watched her niece carefully. Did you have any trouble finding things? Not at all, Rebecca said, just a beat too quickly. Though your neighbor Martha was quite nosy. Caught me coming out and practically interrogated me about your condition. Martha cares about me, Eleanor said mildly. What did you tell her? Just that you were recovering well? Rebecca paused, then added casually, I noticed Uncle Howard's study was locked. Yes, Eleanor said, meeting her niece's gaze steadily. It's been that way since he died. Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. So sentimental, keeping it like a shrine. It can't be healthy, Aunt Ellie, living with all those reminders. Some reminders are worth keeping, Eleanor replied, especially of the people we've lost. An awkward silence fell between them, broken by the arrival of a breakfast tray. Rebecca immediately took charge, adjusting Eleanor's bed, arranging the food, fussing with unnecessary attention to detail. I can feed myself, Eleanor said dryly as Rebecca prepared to cut her toast into bite-sized pieces. I had surgery on my neck, not my hands. Rebecca backed off, but remained hovering nearby, checking her phone periodically with poorly concealed impatience. No word from Uncle James yet. He said he'd be here early. Traffic, probably, Eleanor said, though worry gnawed at her. James was punctual to a fault, a trait inherited from his father. If he was delayed,
As if summoned by her thoughts, James appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. He carried a weathered leather portfolio under his arm, Howard's research binder, which Eleanor recognized immediately. "James," she said, relief washing over her. "You found it?" "Yes," he replied, his gaze flicking briefly to Rebecca before returning to his mother. "And some other things, too. The neighbors called the police this morning." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Police? What happened?" "Someone broke into your apartment last night," James said, watching Rebecca as he spoke. "After I left, they forced open Dad's file cabinet, made quite a mess." Rebecca's face drained of color. "That's terrible. Was anything taken?" "Hard to say," James replied evenly. "The police are investigating. Fortunately, I had already removed Dad's research materials." He patted the portfolio. "After our conversation last night, Mom, I thought it would be safer with me." Eleanor couldn't miss the flash of anger that crossed Rebecca's face before she composed herself. "Well, that's a relief at least. I should go check on the apartment, see what's missing." "The police have sealed it as a crime scene," James interrupted. "No one's allowed in for now." Rebecca's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. "Excuse me, I need to take this," she said, stepping into the hallway. As soon as she was gone, James moved to Eleanor's bedside, lowering his voice. "Mom, you were right. Dad's research, it's all here. Water samples, chemical analyses, photographs of illegal dumping activities. He was building a case against Reynolds Chemical when he died." "Howard knew," Eleanor whispered, a weight lifting from her chest even as a new one settled in its place. "All these years, I thought he was becoming obsessed, paranoid. But he was right." "There's more," James said, glancing at the door to ensure Rebecca hadn't returned. "Dad suspected his heart attack wasn't natural." The last entry in his journal mentions threatening phone calls, a car that kept following him. He was going to the EPA the day he died. Eleanor felt as if the room were tilting beneath her. "You're saying Howard was—" "I don't know for sure," James said quickly. "But given what's happening now, we need to consider the possibility that Dad's death wasn't an accident." Through the window in the door, Eleanor could see Rebecca pacing the hallway, her expression thunderous as she spoke into her phone. "Who is she talking to?" Eleanor wondered aloud. James's expression hardened. "I think I know. When I was leaving your apartment last night, I saw Frank Reynolds parked across the street. He was watching the building." "Frank?" Eleanor repeated, memories stirring. "But why would he—" "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Montgomery's voice interrupted as she entered, breathless and clearly agitated. "I've just received the full toxicology report on the parasite we removed. It showed extremely high levels of chemical compounds consistent with industrial waste, specifically the kind used in textile treatment and manufacturing." James opened the portfolio, extracting a page of Howard's meticulous notes. "Like these?" he asked, handing the doctor a chemical analysis from 5 years earlier. Dr. Montgomery scanned the page, her eyes widening. "Yes, exactly these. Your father documented this contamination?" "And more," James confirmed grimly. 5 years of evidence showing Reynolds' chemical dumping waste into Stillwater Creek. He was about to report it to the EPA when he died. Dr. Montgomery's professional composure slipped entirely. "This changes everything. We need to contact the health department immediately, get the CDC involved. If these chemicals are creating a breeding ground for parasites—" The door burst open as Rebecca returned, her nurse's smile replaced by barely contained fury. "What's going on here?" she demanded, eyes locking onto Howard's portfolio. "The truth," Eleanor said simply. "About Reynolds Chemical. About what they've been doing to the water at Whispering Pines. About what they put inside me." Rebecca's laugh held no humor. "Inside you? Aunt Ellie,
You had an infected insect bite that got out of hand because you refused proper medical treatment. There's no conspiracy here." "Then why was Frank Reynolds watching my apartment last night?" James asked quietly. "And why were you just on the phone with him?" Rebecca froze, caught in the lie. For a moment, Eleanor saw calculation behind her niece's eyes, weighing options, considering angles, planning escape routes. "You don't understand," Rebecca finally said, her voice hard. "None of you do. Reynolds Chemical employs half the county. Without them, this town dies. A few sick old people at Whispering Pines is the price of progress." The casual cruelty of the statement hung in the air. Eleanor stared at her niece, her brother's child, the little girl who had once sat on Howard's knee for stories, and saw a stranger. "How long have you been working for him?" Eleanor asked softly. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Working for him. Aunt Ellie, I'm engaged to his son. Michael and I are getting married next spring. The Reynolds family is my future. My ticket out of budget scrubs and double shifts at Phoenix General." The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Michael Reynolds, Frank's son and heir apparent to the chemical company. The pieces clicked into terrible place. Rebecca's sudden interest in Eleanor's health, her determination to access Howard's study, her convenient presence when Eleanor fell ill. "You've been spying on me," Eleanor said, the words tasting like ash. "Using family connection to get close, to find out what I knew about Howard's research." "At first," Rebecca admitted, dropping all pretense of caring. "But then you got sick, really sick, and it became an opportunity. If you died from this mysterious infection, I'd be your next of kin while James was away. I could have cleared out Howard's study before anyone realized what was there." "And the break-in at Mom's apartment?" James asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Was that you too?" Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Dr. Montgomery, who had been listening in stunned silence, reached for the call button. "I'm contacting security." "Don't bother," Rebecca said, gathering her designer purse. "I'm leaving, but this isn't over. Frank has connections you can't imagine. Judges, police, hospital administrators. By this time tomorrow, Howard's research will be dismissed as the ravings of a mentally unstable old man, and you'll be sedated for your own good, Aunt Ellie." She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Eleanor with something almost like regret. "For what it's worth, I really did hope you'd just die quietly from the infection. It would have been easier for everyone." As Rebecca disappeared down the hallway, Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. The enemy had a face now, a purpose. The vague conspiracy Martha had sensed had solidified into something tangible and fightable. "We need to move quickly," Dr. Montgomery said, already reaching for her phone. "I have contacts at the State Environmental Agency, former colleagues at the CDC. If we combine their current data with your father's research—" "It won't be enough," Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with her clarity of thought. "Not against someone like Frank Reynolds. We need more. We need public attention, witnesses, people willing to speak out." She turned to James. "Call Martha. Tell her to gather everyone at Whispering Pines who's been sick, everyone who's lost someone. It's time they knew what's been living in their water and inside us." The next 48 hours unfolded with dizzying intensity. Eleanor, still confined to her hospital bed, became the unlikely command center for what James had started calling Operation Stillwater. Dr. Montgomery, risking her professional standing, had arranged for Eleanor to be moved to a private room at the end of the corridor, away from the usual hospital traffic and curious ears. "My attending physician privileges only stretch so far," she'd warned. "Once the hospital administration realizes what we're doing, they'll likely intervene. Reynolds Chemical provides significant funding to the oncology wing." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Frank Reynolds had spent decades building his influence, constructing a web of obligations and dependencies throughout Phoenix. Breaking through that web would require precision, timing, and irrefutable evidence. James had temporarily closed his dermatology practice, citing a family emergency. His partners had been understanding but concerned. Reynolds Chemicals' tentacles reached even there, with the company's health plan directing numerous patients to their offices. "I could lose half my practice over this," James admitted during one of their strategy sessions. He sat beside Eleanor's bed, Howard's research spread across the rolling tray table. "But I keep thinking about what Dad would have done. He would have burned his practice to the ground if that's what it took to expose the truth," Eleanor said quietly. "Your father never compromised when it came to protecting people." Martha had proven herself a formidable ally, mobilizing the residents of Whispering Pines with remarkable efficiency. Despite her age and the dismissive, crazy old lady label many had applied to her over the years, she commanded attention when she gathered everyone in the community center, armed with photographs of Stanley Mercer's infected arm and Beatrice Parker's medical records, smuggled out by her niece who worked in medical billing. "7 of us sick in the past year," Martha reported during her daily phone call to Eleanor. 3 dead, including Stanley, all with the same symptoms, unusual infections that started as small bumps, all along the same side of the property that borders Stillwater Creek. The pattern was undeniable, particularly when laid alongside Howard's meticulously documented research. For 5 years before his death, he had tracked increasing contamination levels in the creek, correlating them with production changes at Reynolds Chemical. The company had switched to a new manufacturing process that generated toxic byproducts, disposal of which would have cost millions if done legally. Instead, as Howard's night vision photographs revealed, they simply piped it into Stillwater Creek under cover of darkness. "The parasites are the smoking gun," Dr. Montgomery explained, examining the latest lab results. "The chemicals created the perfect breeding environment for mosquitoes carrying Dirofilaria immitis. Normally, the larvae can't survive in humans. Our immune system destroys them before they mature. But these have been essentially marinating in chemical preservatives, altering their life cycle and resistance." "In English, Catherine," Eleanor prompted, still uncomfortable with medical jargon despite her recent crash course in parasitology. Dr. Montgomery smiled apologetically. "The chemicals that Reynolds dumped made the parasites stronger and able to survive in human hosts. What's more, they're showing signs of accelerated growth and reproduction that simply shouldn't be possible. And Frank Reynolds knew," James added grimly. "Dad's notes show he presented evidence directly to Frank 5 years ago, trying to handle it privately first. Frank promised to address it. Then a week later, Dad was dead." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, pain that had nothing to do with her surgical wound washing over her. Howard had discovered something dangerous and tried to do the right thing, only to be silenced. For 5 years she had lived with the grief of his loss without knowing its true cause. The betrayal cut deeper than any parasite could. "We need more than circumstantial evidence to link Frank to Howard's death," Dr. Montgomery cautioned. "Proving the chemical dumping is one thing, that's science. Proving murder after 5 years is something else entirely." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Martha entered, looking both exhausted and energized, her silver hair escaping its usual neat bun. Behind her came an unfamiliar man in his 60s, dressed in the uniform of Whispering Pines maintenance staff. "Eleanor, this is George Simmons," Martha announced without preamble. "He's worked maintenance at the Pines for 12 years. Tell them what you told me, George." The man twisted his cap nervously in his hands. "I ain't supposed to talk about this. Signed a confidentiality agreement and everything, but my sister's boy has one of them lumps now right on his shoulder and he's only 16. Eleanor gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Please, Mr. Simmons, anything you know could help us." George sank into the chair, shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. Back when Mr. Wilson, your husband, was asking questions about the water, I used to help him sometimes, let him into maintenance areas after hours, showed him where the creek access points were on property. He was a good man, treated me with respect. Yes, he was, Eleanor agreed softly. The night he died, George continued, voice dropping, he called me, said he had proof, photographs of Reynolds himself directing the dumping, said he was going to the EPA in the morning. George looked up, his weathered face etched with old guilt. I told Frank Reynolds about that call. The room fell silent. Eleanor felt as if all the air had been sucked away, leaving her suspended in a vacuum of shock. You what? James finally managed, half rising from his chair. I didn't know what would happen, George protested, hands shaking. Reynolds was my boss, still is. He called me into his office earlier that day, said Mr. Wilson was becoming unstable, making wild accusations that would cost everyone their jobs if he wasn't stopped. Said he just needed time to fix the problems without the EPA shutting everything down. So, you betrayed my father, James said flatly. George's eyes filled with tears. I told Reynolds about the call, about the EPA meeting. He thanked me, gave me a bonus, said he'd talk sense into Mr. Wilson. Next morning, I heard about the heart attack. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiping his eyes. All these years, I told myself it was coincidence. Had to live with myself. But then people started getting sick with these weird infections, and it was just like Mr. Wilson predicted. Eleanor studied the broken man before her, anger warring with a strange sense of validation. Here, finally, was the connection they needed, someone who could testify to Frank's knowledge and motive. Mr. Simmons, she said carefully, would you be willing to make a formal statement about this to the police? That's why I'm here, he replied, straightening slightly. I should have done it years ago. My priest says confession's good for the soul, but justice is better. Doctor. Montgomery, who had been taking notes throughout this exchange, looked up sharply. This changes our timeline. If Reynolds realizes we're building a case, not just about the contamination but about Howard's death, he'll destroy evidence. He's already started, Martha interjected. There were men at the creek this morning installing some kind of filtration system, trying to clean up before anyone can test the water. James reached for his phone. I'll call my lawyer friend at the district attorney's office. We need to move now. As the room erupted into activity, calls being made, statements recorded, evidence organized, Eleanor felt a strange detachment. The parasite removed from her neck had become a symbol of something larger. The insidious corruption that had wormed its way into her community, feeding on ignorance and fear, growing stronger in darkness. By evening, events had accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. James's contact at the district attorney's office had obtained an emergency injunction preventing Reynolds Chemical from altering any aspect of their waste disposal system. EPA officials had arrived to collect water samples from multiple points along Stillwater Creek. Most significantly, Phoenix police had opened a formal investigation into Howard Wilson's death, now reclassified as suspicious. Frank Reynolds, predictably, had responded with legal firepower of his own. A team of corporate attorneys descended on Phoenix General, demanding to speak with Eleanor and threatening the hospital with litigation for facilitating defamatory conspiracy theories against a respected community leader. Dr. Montgomery, backed by the hospital's reluctant legal department, had held them off, but the confrontation made clear that Reynolds wasn't going down without a fight. He's scared, James observed, returning from a tense encounter with the lawyers in the hospital lobby. You can always tell when rich men are scared. They hide behind more expensive suits than usual. Eleanor managed a small smile, though fatigue pulled at her. The surgical wound on her neck throbbed with renewed intensity,
her body's reminder that she was still recovering from a traumatic event. Dr. Montgomery had been monitoring her closely, concerned about potential secondary infection or inflammatory response. "You need rest," the doctor insisted, checking Eleanor's vitals with a frown. "Your blood pressure is elevated and your white count is still higher than I'd like." "I'll rest when this is finished," Eleanor replied stubbornly. "Mom," James said gently, "Dr. Montgomery is right. You're not helping anyone by pushing yourself into a relapse." Eleanor wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. The room had begun to tilt slightly at the edges, sounds becoming oddly muffled. She recognized the signs of exhaustion overtaking her and reluctantly nodded. "Just a short nap," she conceded. "Wake me if anything important happens." She drifted into uneasy sleep, dreams populated by dark water and writhing shadows. Howard appeared repeatedly, always just out of reach, his mouth moving in warnings she couldn't quite hear. When Eleanor awakened, the hospital room was dimly lit, the monitors beside her bed casting a bluish glow across unfamiliar shadows. Night had fallen while she slept, and with it came a strange stillness. No nurses moved in the hallway beyond her door. No distant announcements echoed through the PA system. "James?" she called softly, struggling to orient herself. Her son had been sitting beside her bed when she fell asleep, but his chair now stood empty. Movement in the corner of the room caught her attention, a figure rising from the visitor's sofa, silhouetted against the window blinds. Not James's lanky frame, but someone shorter, broader in the shoulders. "Hello, Ellie," said Frank Reynolds, stepping into the pool of light cast by her bedside lamp. "It's been a while since we've had a proper conversation." Eleanor's hand moved instinctively toward the call button, but Frank shook his head. "Night shift's on break," he said smoothly. "Convenient timing, arranged by people who owe me favors. We won't be disturbed." "What have you done with James?" Eleanor demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Frank smiled thinly. "Your son is fine. Having coffee in the cafeteria with one of my attorneys, discussing the potential consequences of defamation suits on medical practices. My people can be very persuasive about the financial realities of extended litigation." Eleanor studied the man before her. The boy who had asked her to prom 50 years ago, now transformed by decades of wealth and power into someone unrecognizable. His tailored suit and carefully maintained appearance couldn't disguise the hardness in his eyes or the calculating set of his mouth. "How did you get in here?" she asked, playing for time while her mind raced through options. "I own the company that installed the hospital's security system," Frank replied with a small shrug. "Doors tend to open for me." He settled into James's vacated chair, crossing one leg over the other with practiced casualness. "I thought it was time we cleared the air, Ellie. This unfortunate situation has gotten out of hand." "Unfortunate situation?" Eleanor repeated incredulously. "You've been poisoning people, Frank. The parasite they took out of my neck was mutated by your chemicals." "Alleged chemicals," Frank corrected smoothly. "Alleged contamination from unverified sources. Howard always did have a flair for the dramatic, making mountains from molehills, a trait your son seems to have inherited." "Howard wasn't dramatic." He was right. Eleanor's hand drifted to the bandage on her neck, tangible proof of the price she'd paid for Frank's profits. "And now we have proof." Frank's expression hardened momentarily before relaxing into practiced concern. "Ellie, you've been through a traumatic medical experience. Infection, surgery, powerful medications, all taking a toll on a woman of your age. It would be completely understandable if you became confused about certain details." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Frank wasn't just there to intimidate her.
He was laying groundwork, creating a narrative of mental confusion that could undermine everything she might testify to later. "I'm not confused, Frank. Neither was Howard when you had him killed." Frank's smile disappeared entirely. "That's a dangerous accusation, especially without evidence." "George Simmons came forward," Eleanor said, watching Frank's reaction carefully. "He told us everything. How Howard called him that night, how he reported it to you, how convenient Howard's heart attack was the next morning." A muscle twitched in Frank's jaw, the first genuine reaction he'd shown. "George has had problems with alcohol for years. Hardly a reliable witness." "Reliable enough for a search warrant?" Eleanor countered. "The police are reopening Howard's case. They'll be looking for evidence of pharmaceutical manipulation, something to induce heart attack symptoms. Your company produces chemicals that could do that, doesn't it, Frank?" The question struck home. Frank stood abruptly, pacing to the window before turning back to face her. "You always were stubborn, Ellie. It's what drew me to you in high school and what made me hate you when you chose Howard instead." His voice had lost its polished edge, revealing something raw beneath. "Do you know what it was like watching you build a life with him? Watching him succeed with his perfect moral compass, while I did the necessary dirty work of keeping this town employed?" "This isn't about high school rejection, Frank," Eleanor said quietly. "It's about what you've done to people who trusted you, to an entire community." "It's about both," Frank snapped. "Everything I built, everything I sacrificed, and Howard was going to destroy it all with his environmental crusade. He didn't understand the real world, the compromises necessary for progress." "Compromises?" Eleanor felt anger rising through her fatigue. "People have died, Frank. Martha's husband, Stanley Mercer, Beatrice Parker." "How many more are walking around with those things growing inside them because of your compromises?" Frank's expression twisted with something almost like regret. "Acceptable losses given the alternatives. Do you know how many families Reynolds Chemicals supports? How many mortgages and college educations depend on our continued operation?" He spread his hands. "The parasitic situation is unfortunate, a side effect we didn't anticipate, but we're addressing it." "By installing filtration now that you've been caught?" Eleanor shook her head in disgust. "It's too late, Frank. The evidence is already collected. The authorities are involved." "Authorities can be managed," Frank replied with chilling confidence. "Evidence can be discredited. Witnesses can reconsider their statements when they understand the personal cost of persistence." He leaned closer. "George Simmons has grandchildren whose college funds depend on his Reynolds pension. Doctor, Montgomery has a promising career that could be derailed by questions about her judgment. Your son's medical practice serves many patients insured through Reynolds-affiliated plans." Each statement landed like a blow, methodically outlining the breadth of Frank's influence and his willingness to use it. Eleanor had known he was powerful, but hearing him calmly threaten everyone she cared about revealed the true extent of his ruthlessness. "And what about me, Frank?" she asked, meeting his gaze steadily. "What leverage do you have over a widow with terminal cancer?" Frank blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "Cancer? You have cancer?" "Diagnosed last month," Eleanor lied smoothly, a plan forming as she spoke. "Pancreatic, stage 4. That's why I ignored the growth on my neck for so long, seemed insignificant compared to what's already killing me. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4. The fabrication came easily, fueled by desperation and righteous anger." Eleanor watched understanding dawn in Frank's eyes. The realization that she had nothing to lose, no future to threaten, no vulnerability to exploit. "I'm sorry to hear that, Ellie," he said finally, recalibrating his approach. "All the more reason to spend your remaining time in peace, not caught up in legal battles that will outlive you." "On the contrary,"
Eleanor replied, warming to her deception. "It's the perfect reason to ensure justice is done while I can still witness it. I've already recorded my testimony about Howard's research, about your threats, about everything I know. If anything happens to me, anything at all, those recordings go public." It was another lie, but one delivered with enough conviction to plant doubt. Frank studied her face, searching for the bluff, finding only determined resolve. "What do you want, Ellie?" he asked finally. "Everyone has a price. Justice for Howard," she answered without hesitation. "Compensation for every resident of Whispering Pines affected by your chemicals, and your resignation from the company. Complete divestment." Frank laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "You're asking for my entire life's work." "You took Howard's life," Eleanor countered. "Seems like a fair exchange." Before Frank could respond, the door swung open. James stood in the doorway, his expression transforming from concern to fury at the sight of Frank beside his mother's bed. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded, striding into the room. Frank straightened, corporate mask sliding back into place. "Just checking on an old friend, Dr. Wilson. Your mother and I were reminiscing about simpler times." "Get out," James said quietly, danger in his controlled tone. "My mother's lawyer and the police are on their way up." "Unless you want to explain your unauthorized presence in a secure patient room, I suggest you leave immediately." Frank adjusted his suit jacket with practiced nonchalance. "No need for hostility. I was just leaving." He turned to Eleanor, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Think about what I said, Ellie. Some battles aren't worth the cost of winning." As Frank departed, Eleanor felt the adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation ebbing away, leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. James rushed to her side, checking her vitals with professional concern. "Are you okay? Did he threaten you? I never should have left you alone." Eleanor patted his hand reassuringly. "I'm fine. And I think I just got Frank Reynolds to reveal more than he intended." She smiled grimly. "He's scared, James, truly scared. And scared men make mistakes." Outside her window, lightning flickered across the Phoenix skyline, illuminating storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Change was coming, to Whispering Pines, to Reynolds Chemical, to the community that had harbored secrets for too long. Eleanor touched the bandage on her neck, feeling for the first time not violation but vindication. The parasite was gone, but the truth it had brought to the surface was just beginning to emerge. Martha Jenkins died on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Eleanor's confrontation with Frank Reynolds. The call came as Eleanor was preparing to be discharged from the hospital, James helping her pack the few belongings that had accumulated during her stay. "It was quick, at least," said Edith Cooper, Martha's neighbor from Building D. Her voice wavered over the phone line. She was having breakfast on her patio, reading the newspaper, and just slumped over. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. Eleanor sank onto the edge of the hospital bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Martha, fierce, paranoid, ultimately vindicated Martha, had been her closest friend and strongest ally. The loss felt like a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving a hollow ache in its place. Was it? Eleanor couldn't bring herself to ask directly. "The parasite?" "Yes," Edith confirmed grimly. "The EMTs found a ruptured abscess on her shoulder. Dr. Parker from urgent care recognized it immediately. His wife had the same thing before she died. He said the parasite must have migrated to a blood vessel." James took the phone gently from Eleanor's trembling hand. "This is Dr. Wilson, Eleanor's son. Was an autopsy ordered?" Eleanor couldn't hear Edith's response, but James's expression darkened as he listened. "I see. Yes, that's concerning. Please keep us informed about the memorial service arrangements. My mother will want to attend." After ending the call, James sat beside Eleanor, taking her hand in his. The county medical examiner is suddenly unavailable, and Martha's body has been transferred to Reynolds Funeral Services for immediate cremation. Frank's using his influence to destroy evidence. He can't just take her, Eleanor protested, anger flaring through her grief. Martha has family, a daughter in Tucson, grandchildren. The daughter signed off on it, apparently. Reynolds Funeral Services is offering their community service package free of charge to the family. Very generous of them. James's voice dripped with sarcasm. Eleanor stared at her reflection in the hospital room window. A pale, diminished version of herself, neck still bandaged, eyes shadowed by loss and determination. Martha had been the first to recognize the pattern, the first to connect the mysterious illnesses to Reynolds' chemical. Her paranoia had been well-founded caution all along. She deserved better than this, Eleanor whispered. Better than being disposed of like inconvenient evidence. We'll make sure she gets justice, James promised. All of them will. But the path to justice proved steeper and more treacherous than either of them had anticipated. Martha's death marked the beginning of a coordinated counteroffensive from Frank Reynolds and his allies. By afternoon, Dr. Montgomery had been summoned to an emergency meeting with the hospital board of directors, returning ashen-faced and tight-lipped. "They've placed me on administrative leave pending review," she reported, closing Eleanor's hospital room door behind her. "Apparently there are concerns about my professional judgment and questions about unnecessary alarming of the community regarding standard environmental conditions." "They can't do that," James protested. "You're following proper medical protocols for suspected environmental contamination." Dr. Montgomery's laugh held no humor. 3 board members have wives who serve on Reynolds-funded charity committees. 2 others have children with scholarships from the Reynolds Foundation, and the board chairman's brother-in-law is Reynolds Chemicals' head of security. She shook her head wearily. They absolutely can do this, and they have. Eleanor felt the walls closing in. In less than 24 hours they had lost Martha and now Dr. Montgomery's official support. Frank was systematically isolating them, cutting off avenues of help one by one. "What about the EPA investigation?" she asked. "The water samples?" "Inconclusive, supposedly," Dr. Montgomery replied, checking her phone as a text message arrived. "And now my laboratory access has been revoked, so I can't even verify that claim. They're shutting us down, Eleanor." The discharge process that afternoon took on a surreal quality. The nursing staff was polite but distant, avoiding eye contact as they reviewed Eleanor's home care instructions. The hospital administrator, who had visited daily during her recovery, was conspicuously absent. Even the volunteer who wheeled her to James's waiting car seemed uncomfortable, rushing through the formality with nervous efficiency. "It's like I've become radioactive," Eleanor observed as James helped her into the passenger seat. "Everyone's afraid to be associated with the troublemaker from Whispering Pines. Frank's influence at work," James replied grimly, "but he can't silence everyone." Yet Frank seemed determined to try. When they arrived at James's suburban home, Eleanor having agreed to stay with him during her recovery rather than return to Whispering Pines, a certified letter awaited her. Whispering Pines management regretted to inform her that her apartment was being fumigated for community health and safety, and would be inaccessible for the next 30 days. "He's trying to keep you away from your own home," Diane, James's wife, said incredulously after reading the notice. "Can he even do that legally?" "Probably not," James answered, "but challenging it would take time and money we need for more important battles right now." More concerning was the phone call that came that evening from George Simmons, his voice strained and barely audible. "I can't help you folks anymore," he said when Eleanor answered. "My grandson just lost his scholarship to Arizona State. My daughter's mortgage application was denied this morning. The message is pretty clear." "George, we can protect you," Eleanor began, but he cut her off. No disrespect, Mrs. Wilson, but you can't even protect yourself. I've got family to think about. I'm sorry about your husband, truly sorry. But I can't lose everything I've worked for." The line went dead before Eleanor could respond. Another ally lost, another thread of evidence severed. The next morning brought news that the district attorney's investigation into Howard's death had been reassigned to a junior prosecutor known for his connections to the Reynolds family. By afternoon, James received notice that Reynolds Chemical was switching insurance providers, meaning hundreds of his patients would soon be directed to preferred network dermatologists, not including his practice. "He's coming after all of us," Diane observed that evening, watching her husband stare at the notification letter. "Your practice, our savings, our home, everything we've built." James looked up, his expression troubled. "We knew there would be consequences. Dad faced the same choice, and he didn't back down." "And he died for it," Diane countered sharply, fear making her voice brittle. "Leaving your mother alone for 5 years. Is that what you want for me? For our children?" Eleanor, who had been listening from the hallway, felt her heart contract. This was exactly what Frank wanted, to divide them, to make the cost of fighting seem too high. She'd seen the same tactics during Howard's environmental campaigns years ago. Isolate the troublemakers, pressure their families, make the personal price of principle unbearable. That night, alone in James's guest room, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't allow her son and his family to be destroyed for her battle. Howard's death had already taken too much from them. Whatever came next, she would face it alone. The memorial service for Martha Jenkins was held at Whispering Pines Community Center 3 days later. A small, subdued affair that Eleanor attended despite James's concerns about her still healing surgical wound. The room was half empty, many residents apparently deciding that association with Martha, even in death, was too risky. Eleanor sat in the back row, a scarf draped elegantly around her neck to conceal the bandage. She had insisted on coming alone over James's strenuous objections. "You've already risked enough," she'd told him. "Your patients need you. Your family needs you." Frank Reynolds did not attend the service, but his presence was felt nonetheless. A large floral arrangement dominated the front of the room, its accompanying card expressing deepest condolences from the Reynolds family and Reynolds Chemical Corporation. The implicit message was clear. Even in death, Martha remained under Frank's watchful eye. After the brief service, Eleanor approached Martha's daughter, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who accepted condolences with mechanical politeness. "Your mother was my dearest friend," Eleanor said, clasping the woman's hands in her own. "She was brave and determined, and she saw the truth when others refused to look." Martha's daughter glanced nervously around the room before responding. "Mom always did have strong opinions." "Not opinions, facts," Eleanor corrected gently. "Everything she suspected about Reynolds Chemical and the water contamination is being proven true. There's evidence, Mrs. Wilson," the daughter interrupted, withdrawing her hands. "I appreciate your friendship with my mother, but I'd rather not discuss those theories. The Reynolds family has been very generous regarding funeral arrangements, and Michael Reynolds personally assured me that any environmental concerns at Whispering Pines are being addressed." Michael Reynolds, Rebecca's fiancé, Frank's son and heir. The connection landed like a blow, reminding Eleanor how thoroughly Frank had infiltrated every aspect of the community. "Of course," Eleanor said softly, recognizing the fear behind the woman's dismissal. "I understand." As she turned to leave, Eleanor noticed a distinguished older man watching her from across the room. Dr. Harrison Leeds, according to his name tag, his bearing suggesting military background despite his civilian clothes. He approached as she made her way toward the exit. "Mrs. Wilson, I was hoping to speak with you privately." Eleanor regarded him warily.
If you're another Reynolds representative, quite the opposite, he assured her, his voice low. I'm with the Centers for Disease Control. We've been monitoring the situation at Stillwater Creek with considerable interest. Hope flickered briefly. Dr. Montgomery contacted you? Among others, he confirmed, guiding her toward a quieter corner. What she and your son have documented regarding the parasitic infections is unprecedented. The CDC has attempted to launch a formal investigation, but we've encountered significant resistance from local officials. Frank Reynolds, Eleanor supplied. Dr. Leeds nodded grimly. His influence is substantial. However, the CDC answers to federal authority, not local pressure. We're proceeding with our investigation, albeit more quietly than we'd prefer. For the first time in days, Eleanor felt a glimmer of optimism. So you believe us? About the contamination, the parasites, all of it? The preliminary evidence is compelling, Dr. Leeds replied carefully, but we need more, specifically tissue samples from confirmed cases. Mrs. Jenkins' remains would have been invaluable, but they were cremated before we could intervene. Mine weren't, Eleanor said, one hand rising to touch the bandage on her neck. Dr. Montgomery preserved the parasite they removed from me, along with surrounding tissue. Dr. Leeds's eyes lit with professional interest. Those samples could be crucial. Are they secure? Eleanor hesitated, suddenly uncertain. The specimens had been sent to the hospital laboratory for analysis, but given Dr. Montgomery's forced leave and Reynolds' influence over the hospital board, I don't know, she admitted, but Dr. Montgomery would. We need to reach her immediately, Dr. Leeds said, already pulling out his phone. Before those samples mysteriously degrade or get misplaced. As they stepped outside to make the call, Eleanor caught sight of a luxury sedan parked across the street, Frank Reynolds's car, though the man himself wasn't visible. Watching, always watching. Dr. Montgomery answered on the third ring, her voice tense. Eleanor? Is everything okay? After a brief explanation and introduction to Dr. Leeds, the conversation took on an urgent tone. The specimens are still in the lab's secure storage, Dr. Montgomery confirmed, but I've been barred from the premises. I can't access them. I can obtain a federal order, Dr. Leeds said, but that will take time and alert Reynolds to our interest. There's another way, Dr. Montgomery suggested after a moment's thought. Eleanor's son has admitting privileges at Phoenix General. As Eleanor's physician, he could request the samples be transferred to his office for further consultation. The plan took shape quickly. James would retrieve the specimens the following morning, using his professional credentials to cut through administrative red tape. Dr. Leeds would arrange for CDC couriers to collect them from James's office, bypassing local authorities entirely. As Eleanor ended the call, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: hope that Martha's death might not be in vain, fear of Frank's retaliation, and a bone-deep weariness that seemed to permeate her very being. The surgical wound on her neck throbbed in time with her pulse, a constant reminder of what she'd carried inside her, what might still be growing inside others at Whispering Pines. That evening, returning to James's home, Eleanor found Rebecca waiting in the living room. Her niece sat primly on the edge of the sofa, designer handbag placed precisely beside her, engagement ring catching the light with every movement of her hand. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor demanded, instinctively stepping back. Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. Family reconciliation. Michael thought it would be best if I reached out personally, tried to clear the air between us. Michael, Eleanor repeated flatly. Frank's son, your fiancé. Future husband, Rebecca corrected, her tone brittle with forced pleasantness. And your future nephew-in-law, whether you like it or not. We're going to be family, Aunt Ellie. We were already family, Eleanor replied quietly. before you chose to betray that for the Reynolds name and money. Rebecca's carefully composed expression slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of genuine anger. You don't understand what it's like, struggling paycheck to paycheck in healthcare while watching patients like you waste resources on preventable conditions. The Reynolds family built something important. They provide jobs, security, futures, and parasitic infections, Eleanor added. Don't forget those in your accounting of their contributions. Rebecca waved this away impatiently. A temporary situation being addressed. Michael assures me they've implemented new filtration systems that exceed EPA requirements. The past is past. It's time to move forward. Martha Jenkins doesn't get to move forward, Eleanor said, her voice hardening. Neither does Stanley Mercer or Beatrice Parker or my husband. Ancient history, Rebecca insisted. What matters now is the future, your future specifically. She reached into her handbag, extracting a thick envelope. The Reynolds family wants to make things right with you, Aunt Ellie. This is their offer. A generous relocation package. A 2-bedroom condominium in a lovely retirement community in Scottsdale, fully paid for. Plus an annual stipend for living expenses. Eleanor stared at the envelope, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. In exchange for dropping everything, the investigations, the testimony, Howard's research, in exchange for peace, Rebecca countered smoothly, for security in your remaining years, for knowing your son's practice won't suffer, your grandchildren's college funds won't disappear, your legacy won't be as the crazy old lady who fought City Hall and lost everything. The offer dangled before Eleanor like poisoned fruit, tempting in its promise of comfort and security, lethal in its true cost. How easy it would be to take it, to surrender the fight, to spend her final years in climate-controlled comfort rather than exhausting legal battles. For one shameful moment, she considered it. Then Martha's face flashed in her mind. Martha at her kitchen table, spreading out newspaper clippings with trembling hands, insisting something was wrong when everyone else dismissed her concerns. Martha, who had died alone on her patio, killed by the very corruption she'd tried to expose. "Get out," Eleanor said quietly, each word deliberate and final. "Get out of my son's home and don't come back." Rebecca's expression hardened, all pretense of family concern evaporating. "You're making a terrible mistake. Frank's offer won't remain open indefinitely." "It was never open," Eleanor replied. "It was a bribe, dressed up as generosity. Tell Frank I'm not for sale, and neither is Howard's memory." After Rebecca's departure, Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, the confrontation having drained what little energy she'd mustered for Martha's memorial. When James and Diane returned home with their children an hour later, they found her still sitting there, the untouched envelope on the coffee table before her. "Mom?" James asked, alarmed by her pallor. "What happened?" Eleanor gestured to the envelope. "Frank's latest attempt to buy me off." "Delivered by your cousin, who seems fully committed to the Reynolds family business of corruption." Diane picked up the envelope, weighing it in her hand before passing it to James. "Should we see what your integrity is worth in dollars and cents?" James shook his head, dropping the unopened envelope into the fireplace. "Doesn't matter. It's not for sale at any price." He knelt beside Eleanor's chair, taking her hands in his. "We got the specimens, Mom. They're secured in my office safe. Dr. Leeds' people will collect them tomorrow morning." A small victory, Eleanor thought, but perhaps a significant one. Physical evidence that couldn't be dismissed as an old woman's delusions or a grieving widow's vendetta. Scientific proof of what Reynolds Chemical had unleashed upon the community. "Frank won't stop," she warned. "The more ground we gain, the more desperate he'll become." "Let him," James said with quiet confidence. "Every move he makes now only proves his guilt." That night, Eleanor dreamed of Howard again. Unlike the urgent, warning dreams of previous nights, this one was peaceful. They sat together on their old porch swing, Howard's arm around her shoulders, watching fireflies rise from the garden at dusk. "You're doing it, Ellie," he said, his voice as clear and warm as in life. "You're bringing it all to light." "I miss you," she told him, leaning into his embrace. "Every day. I miss you." "I know," he replied simply. "But I'm still with you. In the work, in the truth, in James." She awakened with tears on her cheeks and a strange sense of peace amid the gathering storm. Whatever came next, however Frank escalated his campaign against them, she would face it with Howard's strength joining her own. The parasites had been meant to remain hidden, feeding in darkness beneath the surface of ordinary lives. But once exposed to light, they could no longer thrive, and neither could the corruption that had nurtured them. The CDC's preliminary report arrived 3 days later, delivered personally by Dr. Leeds to James's office after hours. Eleanor sat across from her son's desk as the doctor spread photographs and laboratory documents between them, each page more damning than the last. "The parasite extracted from Mrs. Wilson's neck shows unprecedented levels of chemical alteration," Dr. Leeds explained, pointing to electron microscope images of the specimen. "The cuticular structure has been fundamentally changed by exposure to industrial solvents and preservatives, specifically those used in textile treatment processes." James leaned forward, professional interest overriding personal connection as he studied the images. "These changes allowed it to survive in human tissue longer than normal?" "Not just survive. Thrive," Dr. Leeds corrected grimly. "Normal human immune response should eliminate these parasites before they develop beyond the L3 larval stage." "The specimens we've analyzed from Whispering Pines cases show advanced development, with some reaching near adult stages." Eleanor touched the bandage on her neck, still covering the healing incision. "It was growing inside me?" Dr. Leeds nodded, his clinical detachment softening momentarily. "I'm afraid so, Mrs. Wilson. And based on tissue samples from other victims, including those from Mrs. Jenkins' previous biopsies, the parasitic infections are becoming more aggressive over time." "Adaptation," James murmured. "The parasites are evolving in response to the chemical environment." "Precisely." Dr. Leeds turned to a topographical map of Whispering Pines and the surrounding area, red markers indicating confirmed infection cases. "We've identified 27 cases so far, all clustering along Stillwater Creek downstream from Reynolds Chemical. The pattern is unmistakable." Eleanor studied the map, each red marker representing someone like her, someone who had carried a twisted, corrupted thing beneath their skin without knowing the danger. Martha's marker was there, as were Stanley's and Beatrice's, their pins distinguished by small black dots indicating fatalities. "What about the EPA investigation?" she asked. "Have they found the same chemical signatures in the water?" Dr. Leeds' expression tightened. "That's where things get complicated. The EPA's official report shows acceptable levels of industrial byproducts in Stillwater Creek, technically within regulatory limits." "That's impossible," James protested. "Given these parasitic mutations, the contamination levels must be significant." "Indeed," Dr. Leeds agreed, "which is why the CDC conducted its own independent water sampling." He produced another set of documents, these bearing federal watermarks. "Our results show contamination levels 15 times higher than the EPA's findings, well beyond any regulatory threshold." Eleanor and James exchanged glances, understanding dawning simultaneously. "The EPA samples were compromised," Eleanor said quietly. "Or the testing was manipulated," James added. "Either way, Reynolds got to them." Dr. Leeds didn't confirm their suspicions directly, but his silence was answer enough.
The CDC is preparing to declare a public health emergency for the Whispering Pines area. Once that happens, federal protocols supersede local authority, including any influence Reynolds might have with state agencies. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt a genuine sense of progress. Federal intervention meant resources beyond Frank's reach, investigators immune to his pressure tactics, and legal consequences he couldn't evade through local connections. "How soon?" she asked. "2 days, perhaps 3, Dr. Leeds replied. "There are procedural hurdles, paperwork to be filed. In the meantime, we're coordinating with regional hospitals to identify additional cases and establish treatment protocols." As Dr. Leeds gathered his materials to leave, he paused, his expression grave. "Mrs. Wilson, I feel obligated to warn you. Once the emergency declaration becomes public, Reynolds will know his time is limited. If he's going to act against you, destroy evidence, silence witnesses, it will be in the next 48 hours. The warning lingered in the air after his departure, a shadow falling across their tentative hope. Eleanor watched James lock the CDC documents in his office safe, his movements precise and controlled despite the tension evident in his shoulders. "We should consider additional security measures," he said, not meeting her eyes. "At least until the declaration is official." Eleanor shook her head. "I won't live in fear, James. Not in your home, not with your family at risk." She'd made her decision days ago, though she hadn't yet shared it with him. "I'm going back to Whispering Pines tomorrow." James's head snapped up. "What? Mom, you can't—" "I can and I will," she interrupted firmly. "My apartment should be accessible again by now, fumigation notwithstanding. Martha's memorial reminded me of something important. There are others at Whispering Pines who need to know what's happening, need to be warned before more people fall ill. Frank will be watching for exactly this move," James argued. "It's too dangerous." "Perhaps," Eleanor conceded. "But danger finds us whether we hide or stand our ground. Your father understood that." She reached across the desk, taking James's hand in her own. "I need to do this, son. Not just for Howard or Martha, but for myself. I can't keep running." That night, as James reluctantly helped her pack a small suitcase for her return to Whispering Pines, Eleanor found herself remembering the first days after Howard's death. The numbing shock, the mechanical process of arranging the funeral, the endless casseroles from well-meaning neighbors, and beneath it all, a hollowness that seemed to echo with each heartbeat. She had survived by narrowing her focus, shrinking her world to manageable dimensions, avoiding anything that might crack her fragile composure. Now, 5 years later, she was deliberately walking back into pain and conflict, choosing to confront rather than avoid. The realization brought with it a surprising sense of liberation. Whatever happened next, she was no longer merely enduring. She was fighting. Whispering Pines looked unchanged when James dropped her off the following morning, its manicured grounds and coordinated architecture presenting the same peaceful facade it always had. Yet Eleanor saw it differently now, noting the wilting plantings along the creek bank, the empty chairs on once busy patios, the drawn curtains in apartments where friends had lived. "Call me the minute anything seems off," James instructed as he carried her suitcase to the door of her apartment. "I mean it, Mom. Anything at all." "I promise," she assured him, accepting his worried hug before watching him drive reluctantly away. The apartment felt both familiar and strange as she entered. Everything in its place, yet somehow altered. During her hospital stay, someone had been inside, evident in subtle disturbances, books slightly rearranged on shelves, Howard's photograph on the mantel tilted at a different angle, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering in his study, Frank's people searching for remaining evidence, or perhaps Frank himself revisiting the scene of his earliest crime.
The thought of him touching Howard's things, rifling through their shared life, sent a chill through Eleanor despite the warm morning. She moved through the rooms methodically, checking for anything obviously missing or disturbed. Howard's locked file cabinet stood empty, its contents now secure with James and the CDC. The vintage first editions remained on their shelves, apparently deemed worthless by whoever had searched the apartment. Her jewelry box had been opened, its contents examined, but left intact, all except Howard's class ring, which she'd kept in the velvet-lined compartment beneath her own modest pieces. Its absence felt like a deliberate message rather than simple theft. Howard had worn that ring every day of their marriage, removing it only when his fingers swelled during his final illness. Frank would remember it from their high school days, when Howard's academic achievements had eclipsed Frank's athletic ones. Taking it was personal, a posthumous slight against the man who had chosen over Frank 5 decades earlier. Eleanor was still cataloging the apartment's subtle violations when a tentative knock sounded at her door. Edith Cooper stood in the hallway, her normally tidy appearance slightly disheveled, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "You're back," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "We weren't sure you'd come back at all after Martha?" Eleanor finished gently, stepping aside to invite the other woman in. "That's exactly why I had to return. Please, come in." Edith hesitated before entering, closing the door quickly behind her. "Things have changed while you were gone, Eleanor. There are people watching. Security guards patrolling the grounds, maintenance workers we've never seen before. They say it's for community safety. But they're really watching for signs of illness," Eleanor guessed. "Or for residents talking to outsiders about what's happening here." Edith nodded, sinking into a chair at Eleanor's small dining table. "After Martha died, a team came through with some kind of equipment, testing the water, they said. Then notices went up telling us not to drink from the taps, that bottled water would be provided until further notice." "At least they're acknowledging the water problem," Eleanor observed, sitting across from her neighbor. "Only after 3 people died," Edith replied bitterly. "And they're not acknowledging the real issue, just claiming it's routine maintenance of the water system." She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite being inside Eleanor's apartment. "Stanley's son hired a lawyer. He's talking about a wrongful death suit against Whispering Pines management." Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. "Has he connected with others who were affected? There's strength in numbers." "That's partly why I'm here," Edith admitted. "Word's going around that you have proof, real, scientific proof, about what's in the water and what it's doing to people. About those things they found in Martha and Stanley." "I do," Eleanor confirmed. "The CDC has confirmed parasitic infections linked directly to chemical contamination from Reynolds Chemical. They're preparing to declare a public health emergency." Relief washed over Edith's tired face. "So it's real. We're not imagining things or being hysterical old fools." "It's very real," Eleanor assured her. "And soon Reynolds won't be able to hide it anymore." Edith's relief quickly gave way to renewed anxiety. "But what do we do until then? Every day more people are finding these lumps. Betty Harrison in Building A, Tom Whitaker in C, Mrs. Abernathy's grandson who visits on weekends, all with the same symptoms you and Martha had." Eleanor's stomach twisted at the thought of others suffering as she had, especially a child. "They need medical attention immediately. Not here, not at Phoenix General where Reynolds has influence. They need to go to St. Luke's in Tempe and ask specifically for CDC consultation." As they talked, formulating a plan to quietly spread the word among residents, Eleanor became aware of a vehicle idling outside her window. A glance through the blinds revealed a black SUV parked directly across from her building, 2 men in dark suits seated inside, watching her apartment with unmistakable focus. "Frank's not even being subtle anymore," she murmured, gesturing for Edith to look. "They've been there since you arrived," Edith confirmed. "Different vehicle, same men. They were outside Martha's place, too, before—" She didn't finish the sentence. A chill that had nothing to do with the apartment's air conditioning crept along Eleanor's spine. Frank's earlier visit to her hospital room had been a negotiation attempt, however threatening. This surveillance felt different, the prelude to something more direct. "Edith, I think you should go," Eleanor said, making a sudden decision. "And when you leave, I need you to call my son. Tell him I've changed my mind about staying here, that I want him to come get me as soon as possible." Edith's eyes widened with understanding. "You think they're going to try something?" "I think Frank Reynolds is running out of time and options," Eleanor replied carefully. "And desperate men make dangerous decisions." After Edith's departure, Eleanor moved purposefully through the apartment, gathering essential items: Howard's journal that she'd kept in her bedside table, photocopies of key documents James had made for her, the antique locket containing Howard's photograph, and a lock of his hair. These she placed in her handbag, along with her medications and a small pepper spray James had insisted she carry. Then she settled in her favorite chair by the window, positioned to watch both the front door and the SUV outside, and waited. Darkness had fallen by the time the SUV's doors finally opened, its occupants emerging into the soft glow of Whispering Pines landscape lighting. Eleanor recognized one immediately: Michael Reynolds, Frank's son and Rebecca's fiancé, his features echoing his father's with younger, sharper edges. The other man was unfamiliar, his build suggesting security training, his movements alert and professional as they approached her building. Eleanor's phone vibrated with an incoming text. "James. On my way. 20 minutes out. Stay inside, doors locked." Too late for that strategy, she realized, watching Michael and his companion enter her building. Given Frank's influence at Whispering Pines, they likely had master keys or maintenance access. Locking the door would only delay them momentarily. Instead, she rose calmly, smoothing her slacks and adjusting her scarf to cover the still healing wound on her neck. If confrontation was inevitable, she would meet it with dignity rather than fear. The knock, when it came, was surprisingly polite. 3 measured raps followed by silence. Eleanor opened the door without hesitation, facing Michael Reynolds with the same steady gaze she'd once directed at his father across a high school cafeteria 50 years earlier. "Mrs. Wilson," Michael greeted her, his smile practiced and empty. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "I believe you are," Eleanor replied coolly. "But since you've brought Muscle along, I assume this isn't a social call you'd take no for an answer to." Michael's smile tightened fractionally as he glanced at his companion. "This is Mr. Lawson, head of security for Reynolds Chemical. May we come in?" "I think we'd all prefer this conversation happen privately." Eleanor stepped aside, allowing them entry while leaving the door conspicuously ajar. "I have nothing to hide, Mr. Reynolds, unlike your family company." If the barb landed, Michael gave no indication. He moved into her living room with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding spaces, surveying the modest apartment with barely concealed disdain. "My father tells me you've refused our generous relocation offer," he said, running a finger along the spines of books on her shelf. "He's quite disappointed. He's always spoken highly of you, you know. His high school sweetheart who got away." "I was never his sweetheart," Eleanor corrected firmly. "And I didn't get away. I chose Howard, a decision I've never regretted for a moment." Michael's expression hardened, the family resemblance to Frank suddenly stronger in the set of his jaw. "Yes, Uncle Howard. The environmental crusader whose research is causing such inconvenience now." He picked up a framed photograph of Howard, studying it with calculated indifference. "You know, my father initially offered to buy his silence. Quite generously, I'm told. Howard's principles proved
costly. The casual reference to Howard's murder, for that's what it was, Eleanor now knew with certainty, delivered as if discussing a business transaction gone sour, ignited something fierce and protective inside her. "Put down my husband's photograph," she said, her voice quiet but steely. "You haven't earned the right to touch it." Michael raised an eyebrow but complied, setting the frame back in its place. "My apologies. I understand grief can make people irrational, especially at your age. It's why my father has been so patient with your accusations." "The CDC doesn't think they're accusations," Eleanor countered. "They've confirmed everything. The chemical contamination, the parasitic mutations, the connection to Reynolds Chemicals' illegal dumping. They're declaring a public health emergency within days." Something flickered across Michael's face. Concern, calculation, then resolution. He exchanged a glance with Lawson, who moved subtly to position himself between Eleanor and the door. "That would be unfortunate," Michael said, his tone shifting from condescension to something colder. "Bad for business, bad for the community, jobs lost, property values destroyed, all because one grieving widow couldn't let go of the past." "3 people are dead," Eleanor reminded him. "Dozens more infected. This isn't about the past. It's about preventing more deaths." Michael sighed, the sound exaggerated and theatrical. "Mrs. Wilson, let me be direct. My father sent me with a final offer, one last chance to resolve this situation amicably. The Scottsdale condominium, the stipend, plus a one-time payment of $200,000. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement and publicly retract your claims about Reynolds Chemical." "And if I refuse?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Michael's smile returned, razor-sharp and utterly without warmth. "Then we'd have to consider more definitive solutions. Heart problems run in families, I'm told. Stress at your age can trigger all sorts of medical events, especially in someone recently hospitalized with a serious infection." The threat hung in the air between them, all pretense abandoned. Eleanor felt her heart racing but kept her expression neutral, decades of library work having taught her to maintain composure in difficult situations. "You're threatening to kill me," she said plainly, "just as your father killed Howard." "I'm offering you choices," Michael corrected smoothly. "More than Howard was given, actually." He refused to see reason right up until the end. "A family trait," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "One I'm quite proud of." Michael's patience visibly thinned. "Enough games. We know the CDC is moving forward based largely on the parasitic specimen removed from your neck. We know your son has secured the evidence. What you may not know is that without your testimony, your first-hand account of the infection and its progression, their case weakens considerably." Understanding dawned with chilling clarity. They weren't just threatening her life, they were offering a devil's bargain. Her silence in exchange for her life and possibly James's safety as well. "So that's the real offer," Eleanor said quietly. "I disappear to Scottsdale. Keep my mouth shut about Howard's murder and the parasites, and you leave my son alone." "Smart woman," Michael acknowledged with a nod to Lawson, who produced a folder containing legal documents. "The papers are ready for your signature. Once completed, Mr. Lawson will escort you directly to your new residence. Your belongings will follow tomorrow." "Tonight? You expect me to leave tonight?" "Time is of the essence," Michael replied, checking his watch. "My father prefers this matter be resolved before business hours tomorrow." Eleanor looked at the papers, then at Michael's expectant face, and finally at the still open door to the hallway. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a car door slam, James arriving, perhaps, though he was early based on his text. "I need a moment," she said, moving toward her bedroom, "to collect my medications and a few personal items." Michael nodded,
seemingly satisfied that she was capitulating. 5 minutes, Mrs. Wilson. Mr. Lawson will accompany you. I think not, Eleanor replied with unexpected steel. Unless Reynolds Chemicals' definition of amicable resolution includes watching a 65-year-old woman pack her underwear. Lawson looked to Michael for direction, receiving a small nod of permission. Eleanor closed the bedroom door behind her, heart pounding as she quickly retrieved her phone from her handbag. James answered on the first ring. Mom, I'm pulling into Whispering Pines now. Michael Reynolds is here, she whispered urgently. With security. They're trying to force me to sign non-disclosure papers and leave tonight. She hesitated, then added, They as much as admitted Frank had Howard killed. James's sharp intake of breath carried clearly over the line. I'm calling the police. No time, Eleanor countered. They're giving me 5 minutes to pack, then I'm supposed to leave with them. James, they threatened me directly, said heart problems run in families. Get out of there now, James ordered, his voice tight with fear. Go to Martha's apartment if you can. I still have her spare key. I'm 2 minutes away. I love you, Eleanor said quickly, hearing movement in the living room. Whatever happens, remember that. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket just as Lawson knocked on the bedroom door. Time's up, Mrs. Wilson. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor emerged with a small overnight bag hastily packed with essentials. Michael stood by the dining table, the legal documents arranged neatly beside a fountain pen. Ready to start your new life? He asked with manufactured pleasantness. Not quite, Eleanor replied, setting down her bag. I have a counteroffer. Michael's expression registered surprise followed by amusement. This isn't a negotiation, Mrs. Wilson. Everything's a negotiation, Eleanor countered, channeling the confidence Howard had always admired in her. My terms are simple. I want a recorded confession from Frank admitting to Howard's murder and the chemical dumping. In exchange, I'll sign your papers and disappear. Michael stared at her for a long moment before laughing outright. You can't be serious. Completely serious, Eleanor assured him. You see, I've already lost my husband to your family's greed. I've nearly lost my own life to what your company put in that creek. What I won't lose is the truth, not without a fight that will make your father's remaining years very uncomfortable regardless of the outcome. The amusement faded from Michael's face, replaced by cold calculation. And how exactly would you manage that? I recorded our entire conversation, Eleanor lied smoothly, praying her amateur theater experience from college still served her. Every word, including your admission about Howard's murder and your threats against me. The recording is automatically uploading to cloud storage as we speak. Lawson moved toward her, menace in his posture. Give me the phone, Mrs. Wilson. Touch me. And the upload completes instantly, Eleanor bluffed, backing toward the door. It's a dead man's switch. Any attempt to interfere triggers immediate distribution to the CDC, the FBI, and every news outlet in Arizona. She had no such technology, of course, but the conviction in her voice gave both men pause. Michael's expression darkened as he reassessed the situation. You're bluffing, he decided, nodding to Lawson. Take her phone. As Lawson advanced, Eleanor's back hit the apartment door, which suddenly swung open behind her, revealing James and 2 uniformed police officers. What's going on here, Mom? James asked, his concerned tone belied by the tactical precision of his timing. Eleanor had never been so relieved to see her son. Michael Reynolds was just leaving, she said steadily. After threatening my life and admitting his father's involvement in Howard's death. The officers' expressions hardened as they took in the scene. Lawson's aggressive stance, the legal documents on the table, Michael's poorly concealed fury. Is that right, sir? The older officer asked Michael. Were you threatening this woman? Absolutely not, Michael replied smoothly, professional mask sliding back into place. Mrs. Wilson misunderstood our conversation. We were discussing a relocation offer from Whispering Pines management in light of her recent health concerns.
At 9:30 at night, with security present? James challenged, moving to stand beside his mother. Seems an unusual approach to real estate. The younger officer stepped forward. I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you gentlemen. As Michael and Lawson reluctantly produced their IDs, Eleanor felt the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to ebb, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She leaned slightly against James, drawing strength from his solid presence. We have a warrant to search these premises, Michael suddenly announced, producing an official-looking document from his jacket pocket. Signed by Judge Harrison this afternoon. Whispering Pines Management has received reports of unauthorized modifications to the property. The older officer examined the warrant carefully, his expression revealing nothing. This appears to be in order, he finally acknowledged. However, given the circumstances and the allegations of threats, I think it best if our department conducts the search, rather than Mr. Reynolds' security personnel. Michael's jaw tightened visibly. The warrant specifically authorizes Reynolds Chemicals' environmental team to assess potential contamination. And they're welcome to do so, the officer replied evenly, once we've secured the premises and ensured Mrs. Wilson's safety. Department policy, sir. A tense standoff followed, broken by the crackle of the officer's radio. Unit 17, be advised we have a federal agent requesting to speak with you regarding your current location. Federal agent? Michael repeated, alarm flashing across his features. The door to the neighboring apartment opened, revealing Dr. Leeds in the hallway. Centers for Disease Control, he announced, displaying his credentials. I believe Mrs. Wilson's apartment falls within our designated investigation zone for the Stillwater Creek contamination incident. For the first time, Michael appeared genuinely rattled. This is harassment, he protested. Reynolds Chemical has complied with all environmental regulations. Our legal team will save it for your arraignment, Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Leeds interrupted calmly. The CDC has declared a public health emergency for Whispering Pines and the surrounding area, effective as of 5 o'clock this evening. Federal jurisdiction now supersedes your local arrangements. Eleanor watched as Michael's careful composure crumbled entirely, his father's empire of influence collapsing around him in real time. The flash drive on Dr. Leeds's lanyard caught her attention, identical to the one Howard had always carried, containing his research data. You found it, she whispered to James. Howard's backup drive. James nodded, a grim smile of satisfaction crossing his face. In the library card catalog filed under R for Reynolds, Dad always was methodical. As the officers escorted Michael and Lawson from the apartment, Eleanor felt a weight lifting. Not just the immediate danger, but the heavier burden of doubt and isolation she'd carried since Howard's death. The truth he had died protecting was finally emerging into the light, validated not just by her faith in him but by science and evidence. The parasite that had grown beneath her skin had been meant to remain hidden, feeding in darkness. And instead, it had become the catalyst for exposing a deeper corruption, one that had claimed lives, shattered families, and poisoned an entire community. Frank Reynolds had spent decades building his empire on secrets and intimidation. Eleanor had lived 5 years with grief and unanswered questions. Now, as federal agents began arriving at Whispering Pines and residents emerged from their apartments to witness Michael Reynolds' humiliation, the balance was finally shifting. The truth, like the parasite, had found its way to the surface, impossible to ignore any longer. 6 months passed before Eleanor returned to Stillwater Creek. The winter rains had come and gone, leaving the desert landscape transformed by patches of wildflowers and renewed greenery. Spring arrived early in Phoenix that year, as if nature itself was eager to reclaim what had been poisoned. Eleanor stood at the edge of the water, leaning lightly on a cane, a concession to the lingering weakness in her left side, aftermath of the minor stroke she'd suffered during Frank Reynolds' arraignment. James had worried the courtroom drama would be too much for her,
but Eleanor had insisted on being present as Frank faced justice for Howard's death. "You're sure about this, Mom?" James asked now, standing beside her at the creek bank. The transformation in their relationship over the past months had been one of the few positive outcomes of the ordeal. Mother and son forged into true partners by shared purpose and danger. "I'm sure," Eleanor replied, her voice stronger than her body might suggest. "This is where it needs to be." She opened the small wooden box she carried, revealing Howard's class ring nestled inside. The police had recovered it during their search of Frank Reynolds' office safe, a trophy kept for 5 years, tangible evidence of his jealousy and obsession. "Dad would appreciate the symmetry," James observed, watching as Eleanor removed the ring, returning it to the place where his work finally found validation. Eleanor nodded, memories washing over her as she held the ring one last time. Howard slipping it onto her finger the night before their wedding, laughing about how it dwarfed her hand. Howard twisting it absently while deep in thought at his desk. Howard's fingers swollen in his final days, the ring temporarily relegated to the chain around his neck. "He never took it off willingly," she said softly. "It was part of him, his commitment to truth, to doing what was right even when it was difficult." With a gentle motion, Eleanor cast the ring into Stillwater Creek. The water, clear now after months of remediation efforts, accepted it with a small splash, ripples spreading outward like the consequences of a single act of courage. The past half-year had brought changes Eleanor could scarcely have imagined during those terrified moments in her apartment with Michael Reynolds. The CDC's public health emergency declaration had triggered a cascade of investigations: environmental, financial, criminal. Reynolds Chemicals' decades of malfeasance had been exposed layer by layer, each revelation more damning than the last. Frank Reynolds himself had proven surprisingly defiant during the early proceedings, maintaining his innocence with the righteous indignation of the privileged accustomed to impunity. That facade crumbled only when Michael, facing substantial prison time himself, agreed to testify against his father in exchange for leniency. "He told me it was a warning," Michael had stated on the witness stand, describing Howard's death, "to show what happened to people who threatened the company. He said it was easy, just the right chemical compound introduced during a routine physical designed to mimic natural heart failure." Eleanor had watched Frank's expression during this testimony, the shock of betrayal giving way to cold fury, then resignation as he realized the empire he'd built through intimidation was collapsing under the weight of truth. The parasitic infections proved to be the linchpin in the case against Reynolds Chemical. Dr. Montgomery, reinstated with honors at Phoenix General, had worked alongside CDC specialists to document the direct correlation between the company's chemical dumping and the unprecedented mutations in Dirophilaria immitis larvae. Her research, combined with Howard's meticulous historical data, created an irrefutable timeline of corporate negligence spanning over 2 decades. "Penny for your thoughts," James said now, interrupting Eleanor's reflections as they turned away from the creek. "I was thinking about Martha," she replied, navigating carefully along the newly constructed walkway that had replaced the muddy path. "She should have lived to see this." The Whispering Pines Community Center had been converted into a temporary CDC field office during the height of the investigation, its walls covered with maps and medical data. Now, as they approached the building, Eleanor saw it had been transformed again, this time into a memorial space. Photographs of those who had died from parasitic infections lined the entrance hallway, each face familiar to Eleanor, each loss a personal wound. Martha's image held the center position, her formal portrait from the community directory replaced by a candid photograph Eleanor had provided, showing Martha laughing on her patio, surrounded by the container garden she had tended so carefully. "She knew," Eleanor said, pausing before the display. "Before any of us, she recognized the pattern. If we'd listened sooner—" "Don't," James advised gently. "That path leads nowhere helpful, Mom. Martha would be the first to tell you that." He was right, of course. Martha had never been one for dwelling on might-have-beens, preferring action to regret. It was Martha who had collected the newspaper clippings, Martha who had insisted on investigating when others dismissed her concerns as paranoia, Martha whose determination had kept the truth from being buried alongside Howard. The community center's main room had been arranged with chairs facing a small podium, residents already gathering for the afternoon ceremony. The Reynolds Chemical Settlement Fund trustees had called this meeting to announce the first round of compensation distributions to affected families. Eleanor recognized most of the faces, neighbors who had initially kept their distance when the scandal broke, afraid of association with controversy, now greeting her with respectful nods or tentative smiles. The CDC investigation had ultimately identified 73 cases of parasitic infection linked to the contaminated creek, 17 of them fatal. Everyone at Whispering Pines knew someone who had been affected. "Mrs. Wilson," called Edith Cooper, waving from a seat near the front. "We saved places for you and Dr. Wilson." As Eleanor made her way forward, she noted the changes in Edith, the newfound confidence in her posture, the purposeful energy that had replaced fearful hesitation. Like many residents, Edith had found her voice during the crisis, eventually testifying before the State Environmental Commission about conditions at Whispering Pines. "How are you feeling?" Edith asked as Eleanor settled carefully into the chair beside her. "That new medication helping with the pain?" "Better every day," Eleanor assured her, though the surgical scar on her neck still ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of what she had carried inside her. "How's the committee work going?" Edith brightened visibly. "We've finalized the design for the memorial garden. Construction starts next month once the final soil testing confirms the remediation is complete, and the Community Oversight Board had its first official meeting with the new management company yesterday." The transformation of Whispering Pines had been nearly as dramatic as the downfall of Reynolds Chemical. With Frank and Michael both facing lengthy prison sentences, the company had been forced into bankruptcy reorganization. The retirement community, once Frank's personal fiefdom, had been placed under receivership and eventually sold to a national senior living corporation with a reputation for ethical management. More significant was the change in the residents themselves. People who had once avoided making waves now attended community meetings with pointed questions about water quality reports and environmental safeguards. A residents' council had been formed, with Eleanor reluctantly accepting the position of chairperson, despite her ongoing health challenges. "Dr. Montgomery just arrived," James noted, gesturing toward the entrance where Catherine Montgomery was speaking with the settlement fund administrators. "And Dr. Leeds with her." Eleanor smiled at the sight of the unlikely allies who had become genuine friends during the investigation and subsequent legal proceedings. Dr. Montgomery had expanded her practice to include ongoing monitoring of all parasitic infection survivors, while Dr. Leeds had established a permanent CDC field office in Phoenix focusing on environmental health impacts. The room quieted as the trustees took their places at the podium, shuffling papers and adjusting microphones with bureaucratic solemnity. Eleanor found herself only half listening to the opening remarks, her attention drawn instead to the changed atmosphere at Whispering Pines, the sense of community forged through shared ordeal, the collective resilience that had emerged from fear and isolation. "As most of you know," the lead trustee was saying, "the total settlement amount of $85 million represents one of the largest environmental contamination judgments in Arizona history. While no amount of money can compensate for the losses many of you have suffered, we hope these distributions will provide some measure of justice and security." Eleanor thought of Howard, who had never sought financial compensation for his environmental advocacy, only accountability and change. What would he make of this outcome? His research finally validated, Reynolds Chemical dismantled, the creek bearing his name on conservation maps. Before we proceed with the individual award announcements, the trustee continued, the board would like to recognize the person whose courage and persistence made this settlement possible. Without her willingness to challenge powerful interests at great personal risk, the truth about Stillwater Creek might never have come to light. Eleanor realized with a start that the trustee was looking directly at her, as were many in the audience. Mrs. Eleanor Wilson, would you join us at the podium? James squeezed her hand encouragingly as Eleanor rose, leaning on her cane as she made her way forward. Public recognition had never been her goal. In truth, she would have preferred to remain in the background, but she understood the symbolic importance of this moment for the community. The trustees have unanimously voted to name the Whispering Pines Medical Facility the Howard Wilson Memorial Clinic, the trustee announced, presenting Eleanor with a framed artist's rendering of the proposed building. Additionally, we are establishing the Eleanor Wilson Whistleblower Fund to support others who take stands against environmental wrongdoing. Applause filled the room, faces that had once regarded her with suspicion or dismissal now showing genuine appreciation. Eleanor accepted the frame with murmured thanks, finding herself unexpectedly moved by this tangible acknowledgement of Howard's legacy. As she turned to address the gathering, her gaze fell on a figure standing at the back of the room, Rebecca, looking considerably less polished than Eleanor remembered. Her designer wardrobe replaced by simple business attire, her expression uncertain as she met her aunt's eyes across the distance. Eleanor had heard through family channels that Rebecca had broken her engagement to Michael Reynolds shortly after his arrest, claiming she'd been unaware of the family's criminal activities. Whether this was true or a convenient distancing from a sinking ship, Eleanor couldn't say with certainty. They hadn't spoken since Rebecca's attempt to bribe her with Frank's relocation offer. "Thank you for this honor," Eleanor began, addressing the room while maintaining eye contact with her niece. But the real recognition belongs to those who first raised concerns when it was unpopular to do so. Martha Jenkins, who collected evidence when others dismissed her as paranoid. Stanley Mercer, who insisted something was wrong with the water long before anyone would listen. Howard Wilson, who sacrificed everything to protect this community. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. What happened at Whispering Pines, the contamination, the illnesses, the cover-up, was possible because we accepted isolation as the natural condition of aging. We believed that retirement meant withdrawing from engagement, that speaking up was someone else's responsibility. Heads nodded throughout the audience, recognition dawning on faces both familiar and new. The parasites that infected some of us thrived in darkness and silence, Eleanor continued, one hand rising unconsciously to touch the scar on her neck. They grew beneath the surface, feeding on our bodies while we ignored the warning signs. The corruption at Reynolds Chemical operated the same way, feeding on our community while we looked away. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably at the back of the room, but didn't leave. Howard used to say that environmental protection isn't about saving abstract concepts like the planet or the future, Eleanor said, warming to her theme. It's about protecting specific places and people we love. Stillwater Creek, Whispering Pines, our neighbors and friends. What we learned through this ordeal is that protection requires vigilance and courage, not just from the young or the powerful, but from everyone who notices something wrong and chooses to speak up. The settlement trustee attempted to reclaim the podium as Eleanor concluded, but was waved back by the audience, who had risen to their feet in spontaneous ovation. Embarrassed by the attention but gratified by the response, Eleanor made her way carefully back to her seat, accepting handshakes and embraces along the way. James met her halfway, concern evident in his expression. "You're tired," he observed quietly, offering his arm for support. "We can leave before the individual announcements if you'd like." Eleanor shook her head, determined to see the proceedings through. I'm fine. This matters. People receiving tangible acknowledgement of what they endured. As they returned to their seats, Eleanor noticed Rebecca had disappeared from the back of the room. A small pang of regret surfaced, not for the rift between them, which had been Rebecca's doing, but for the opportunity family represented. If the Whispering Pines ordeal had taught Eleanor anything, it was the value of connection and reconciliation while time remained. The settlement announcements continued through the afternoon, each name representing a chapter in the larger story of Whispering Pines. The family of Martha Jenkins received one of the largest awards, as did Stanley Mercer's son and Beatrice Parker's husband. Survivors of parasitic infections, including Eleanor herself, were allocated both immediate compensation and ongoing medical coverage through a specialized trust. By the time the meeting concluded, shadows had lengthened across the community center floor, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow through the windows. Eleanor felt exhausted but fulfilled, the completion of this phase representing another step in the community's healing process. "Ready to head home?" James asked, as the crowd began to disperse. "Just one more stop," Eleanor replied, gesturing toward the memorial wall. Standing before Martha's photograph, Eleanor took a moment to express silent gratitude to the friend who had stood by her when others retreated. Martha's persistence, her refusal to accept convenient explanations, had been the foundation upon which the entire case against Reynolds Chemical had been built. "She would have loved today," Eleanor said softly. "Especially seeing Frank's empire redistributed to the people he harmed." "She sees it," James assured her, the conviction in his voice surprising Eleanor. Her scientifically minded son had never been one for spiritual sentiments. "Dad, too. They know what you accomplished." As they turned to leave, Eleanor caught sight of a familiar figure waiting by the exit, Rebecca, still hesitant but clearly determined to speak with them. "Aunt Ellie," she began awkwardly as they approached. "Dr. Wilson, I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "That depends," Eleanor replied evenly. "Why are you here, Rebecca?" Her niece shifted uncomfortably, designer handbag conspicuously absent, replaced by a worn leather portfolio. "I've been working with the victim's rights advocate assigned to the Reynolds criminal case." "Voluntary community service part of my—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Attempt to make amends." James's expression remained skeptical, but Eleanor studied her niece more carefully, noting the shadows beneath her eyes, the absence of the calculating ambition that had once defined her demeanor. "I was wrong," Rebecca continued, when neither responded. "About everything. About the Reynolds family, about what was happening at Whispering Pines, about you, Aunt Ellie." She opened the portfolio, removing a small velvet pouch. "I found this among Michael's things after his arrest. I think it belongs to you." Inside the pouch was Howard's library card, worn and faded from years of use, but immediately recognizable to Eleanor. She had searched for it after his death, assuming it lost in the chaos of his final days. "He kept it as a souvenir," Rebecca explained, disgust evident in her voice. "Michael told me his father took it from Uncle Howard's wallet before they staged the heart attack. Some kind of twisted trophy." Eleanor accepted the card with trembling fingers, memories surfacing of Howard's countless trips to the library, his delight in research, his belief in knowledge as the foundation of justice. The card represented everything Frank Reynolds had despised about Howard: his intellectualism, his respect for facts, his faith in institutions dedicated to public good. "Thank you for returning this," Eleanor said simply, tucking the card into her purse alongside Howard's ring box. Both items recovered, both connections to the man whose work had finally been vindicated. Rebecca nodded, clearly uncertain what more to say. The gulf between them remained substantial, trust shattered, family bonds severely tested, yet Eleanor recognized in her niece's awkward gesture a first step toward possible redemption. "The victim's advocacy work," Eleanor said after a moment, "is it helping?" Relief flickered across Rebecca's face at this neutral opening. "I think so. It's humbling, hearing what people went through, knowing I was part of the system that hurt them." She hesitated, then added, "I'm applying to public health graduate programs. I want to work on environmental justice issues eventually." James remained silent beside Eleanor, his judgment reserved but his stance softening slightly at this evidence of genuine change. The path forward with Rebecca would be complicated, requiring time and consistent demonstration of changed priorities. But it was a path that existed, however tentatively. "Howard would approve," Eleanor finally said, offering neither absolution nor rejection, just acknowledgement of possibility. He always believed people could change when confronted with truth. As they parted ways outside the community center, the setting sun painted Whispering Pines in amber light, transforming the ordinary buildings into something momentarily golden. Eleanor paused to take in the view, thinking of how differently she saw this place now. Not as the quiet retirement community where she had hidden from life after Howard's death, but as the battleground where she had reclaimed purpose and connection. "What now?" James asked as they walked slowly toward his car. "The settlement, the clinic, the memorial garden? It's all moving forward. But what about you, Mom? What do you want for yourself?" The question caught Eleanor by surprise. For months, her focus had been external. The investigation, the legal proceedings, the community recovery efforts. Her own future had remained unexamined, overshadowed by the fight for justice and truth. "I think," she said carefully, "I'd like to finish Howard's cookbook, the one we always talked about writing together. Not just recipes, but stories, about environmental work, about Whispering Pines, about what happened here, a different kind of legacy." James smiled, recognizing in this simple ambition his mother's resilience and forward focus. "I think that's perfect. And where will you write it? Here at Whispering Pines?" Eleanor considered the question as they reached the car, looking back at the community that had been transformed through crisis into something stronger and more vigilant. The new management had offered her a significant rent reduction to remain, partly recognition of her role in exposing the contamination, partly acknowledgement of her importance to the community's identity. "Yes," she decided, "this is home now, not just a place to wait out my remaining years, but somewhere I can still contribute." "Besides," she added with a small smile, "someone needs to keep an eye on that creek." As James drove them away from Whispering Pines, Eleanor watched the newly installed warning signs along Stillwater Creek recede in the side mirror. Tangible evidence of lessons learned and precautions taken. The parasite that had grown beneath her skin had been meant to remain hidden, feeding in darkness and silence. Instead, it had been brought into the light, examined, understood, and ultimately defeated. Like the truth itself, painful in its emergence, but ultimately healing in its revelation. Life's second act brings challenges we never expected. Health scares that wake us in the night, systems that seem designed to silence our concerns, and the lingering fear of becoming a burden to those we love. Eleanor's journey reminds us that our greatest strength often emerges when we're tested most severely. Like her, many of us have felt that small worry grow beneath the surface, that pain dismissed, that concern waved away by busy doctors or distracted family. But Eleanor's story shows us something powerful. Our age isn't our weakness, it's our weapon. The wisdom to recognize patterns others miss, the patience to pursue truth when quick fixes fail, the courage to stand firm when powerful forces push back. Most importantly, Eleanor discovered that isolation is a choice we don't have to make. Whether you're facing health challenges, navigating retirement communities, or simply feeling invisible in a youth-obsessed world, remember that your voice matters. Your experiences hold value. Your vigilance protects not just yourself, but an entire community. What health concern have you raised that others initially dismissed? How did you find the courage to advocate for yourself or a loved one when the system pushed back? Share your story of standing up and speaking out, because somewhere, someone needs to hear they're not alone in the fight.